Tonight we begin with a line pressed into clay almost 4,000 years ago, preserved through copies made by scribes in ancient Mesopotamia. Several surviving witnesses to the composition, now called Enki and the World Order, come from Nippur and belong to the Old Babylonian period. Scholars connected with the University of Pennsylvania studied important fragments, while Oxford researchers later helped assemble Sumerian literary texts into modern editions. Among the damaged verses appears Narnia's usually quiet moment. A divine sanctuary is described as bewildering, radiant, and surrounded by a terrifying power. Then the text tells you something unexpected. The Anunna gods dare not approach it. These are not frightened villagers standing outside a forbidden temple. They are gods themselves. Yet something connected with Enki causes even this divine assembly to remain at a distance. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And wherever you are listening tonight, tell me your location and your local time. There is something strangely comforting about imagining all these distant rooms, scattered across the world, growing quiet together. Now you return to the tablet. There is no thunderclap waiting for you there, and no convenient explanation follows the troubling sentence. Ancient scribes rarely behave like modern screenwriters. They do not stop to explain the mythology for an audience several millennia in the future, rather inconsiderate of them. Really, instead, the poem continues as if the mystery needs no explanation at all. That principle matters. The surviving composition belongs to a vast literary world in which divine authority is usually treated with careful structure. Gods possess rank, responsibilities, temples, cities, families, alliances, and occasionally spectacular disagreements. They quarrel, praise one another, make decisions, and distribute powers across the ordered world. Yet even within that divine society, boundaries remain. The passage describes Enki establishing a holy sanctuary associated with the deep waters beneath the world. Its interior is portrayed as extraordinarily complex, almost impossible for an observer to understand completely. The imagery feels less like ordinary architecture and more like a place where divine order itself becomes physical. You can imagine the scribe leaning closer to wet clay. His reed stylus presses another wedge, then another. He probably has no idea that people thousands of years later will stare at those marks through museum photographs and digital databases. To him, the story belongs to an inherited tradition, perhaps already ancient during his own lifetime. That is one of the first important facts to keep beside you tonight. The tablets preserving these compositions are not necessarily the moment when the traditions themselves first appeared. Old Babylonian scribes copied stories whose origins may reach backward into earlier Sumerian religious memory. Exactly how far backward remains debated. Researchers at institutions such as Oxford and the University of Pennsylvania have spent generations comparing fragments, duplicate manuscripts, spelling variations, and damaged lines. Their work shows how cautiously any reconstruction must be approached. One broken tablet can preserve a sentence differently from another. So when modern audiences hear that the Anunnaki were forbidden to challenge a mysterious being, the surviving evidence requires slower language. The ancient line does not clearly describe a formal prohibition against challenging someone. It describes divine hesitation. That distinction is important. The gods are portrayed as unwilling, or perhaps unable, to approach Enki's astonishing sanctuary because of its overwhelming sacred power. Whether the emotion should be understood as fear, reverence, ritual caution, or poetic awe remains open to interpretation. Ancient religion often refuses our neat categories. A holy place can be terrifying without being evil. A god can be feared without becoming an enemy. A boundary can be respected without anyone issuing a command against crossing it. Perhaps that makes the passage more intriguing. If a king fears another king, you understand the politics immediately. If an ordinary person fears a god, you understand that relationship as well. But when gods themselves remain outside a sacred boundary, you begin wondering what kind of hierarchy the poet imagines. Who stands above whom? What gives one divine power or authority over another? And what could make supernatural beings hesitate for now? The answer remains hidden behind temple language. The mainstream historical picture gives you a firm foundation. Enki was among the major deities of southern Mesopotamian religion, particularly associated with the ancient city of Eridu. Literary texts regularly connect him with wisdom, organization, ritual knowledge, creativity, and the mysterious freshwater depths. None of this requires visitors from another planet. That modern idea appears much later. During the 20th century, fringe interpretations transformed the Anunnaki into extraterrestrial beings who supposedly engineered humanity. Archaeologists and specialists in the ancient Mesopotamian languages do not accept that interpretation as a translation of the Sumerian evidence. Still, the genuine texts are hardly boring. In some ways, they are stranger. They imagine a universe governed through councils, decree, divine occupations, sacred technologies of ritual, and powers that can apparently be transferred or assigned. Gods oversee rivers, cities, agriculture, craftsmanship, birth, judgment, warfare, writing, and kingship. The cosmos resembles an administration, an immortal bureaucracy, perhaps. Even eternity apparently requires management. That little detail has always given the Sumerian divine world a peculiar familiarity. Their gods inhabit magnificent temples and command cosmic forces, yet they also hold assemblies, assign responsibilities, complain about work, and protect the jurisdictions, and within this enormous system stands Enki. You should resist the temptation to decide too quickly what he represents. Later traditions describe him through many overlapping roles, and ancient compositions do not always present theology with a perfect consistency. Different cities emphasized different gods, while scribes preserved traditions that sometimes sit uneasily beside one another. There was never one tidy handbook. Scholars still debate how much these texts reflect formal theology, scribal education, temple ideology, poetic invention, or combinations of all four: Yale, Oxford, Chicago, and Pennsylvania. Researchers have approached such literature through different historical and linguistic methods. The disagreement is useful. It reminds you that ancient religion was lived before it was catalogued. Somewhere around 4,000 years ago, a young scribe may have copied this composition as part of his education. He sits near a courtyard, perhaps hearing sandals scrape against packed earth while voices drift through adjoining rooms. His tablet is small enough to hold. The universe inside it is not. He writes of divine powers ordering the world, assigning its resources, establishing places, and determining how civilization should function. Eventually the poem reaches that sanctuary, described with language of brilliance, complexity, water, an overwhelming presence. Then the Anunna stop. They do not enter casually, they remain outside. Imagine that moment without adding anything the tablet does not say. There is no spacecraft above the temple. There is no hidden machine humming beneath the floor. There is no secret species suddenly revealed behind a sealed door. There is only distance, and sometimes distance is more unsettling. The poet assumes that Enki's sacred domain possesses enough authority that even other gods respond with caution. They gather nearby with prayers and supplications, acknowledging the power associated with the place. Perhaps the passage is ceremonial praise. Perhaps it magnifies Enki by showing other divinities respecting his sanctuary. Perhaps some older theological idea survives inside the poetry, one whose full meaning disappeared when the temples themselves fell silent. You cannot know yet. That uncertainty is where tonight's journey begins. Because the important question is not whether a sensational modern claim can be forced onto a damaged ancient text, the more interesting question is what the ancient people themselves believed they were describing. They imagined gods with boundaries. They imagined sacred places that gods respected. They imagined an order older than any human king. And hidden inside that order, they placed distinctions of rank and knowledge that we only partly understand. The tablet does not hand you a forbidden being. It gives you something subtler, a threshold. Beyond it stands Enki's mysterious domain, surrounded by the language of power and incomprehension. Before it stand the Anunna, divine beings who might seem supreme from a human perspective, yet who do not simply cross. For tonight, you remain beside them. You do not enter either. You simply watch the silent boundary while 4,000 years of darkness gather between the marks in the clay, and somewhere beyond that boundary, the deeper story waits. You move away from the tablet slowly, not by leaving it behind, but by stepping into the world that once surrounded it. The clay in your hands becomes landscape. Heat rises from a broad plain beneath a pale sky, and the horizon seems almost unnaturally flat. There are no mountains nearby to frame the distance. Instead, the earth stretches outward beneath the sun, crossed by channels of water that gleam like narrow strip of metal. You're standing in southern Mesopotamia. The air carries damp mud, reeds, animal dung, and the faint mineral smell of irrigation water. Somewhere beyond a low wall, grain is being ground against stone. A donkey complains with impressive commitment, while workers move baskets through the narrow streets. Civilization is already busy, yet almost everything depends on water. The great rivers define this country, but they do not behave like obedient lines on a modern map. Their channels shift, divide, flood, retreat, and leave behind rich sediment. Communities survive because people learn to guide that water through canals, embankments, basins, and carefully maintained fields. Archaeological research across southern Iraq confirms how deeply irrigation shaped early urban life. Excavations, landscape surveys, and environmental studies have shown that cities depended upon networks of canals linking fields, settlements, marshes, and river branches. You can feel that dependence everywhere. A cracked canal wall is not a minor inconvenience. It can become hunger. A blocked channel can become conflict. A successful harvest can become temple wealth, royal power, and enough surplus to support scribes who spend years mastering signs pressed into clay. Nothing here is simple. The landscape itself seems to teach the lesson. You walk along a raised path beside dark water, where reeds bend softly in the afternoon wind. Birds lift suddenly from the marsh edge, startling you for a moment before silence returns. Farther away, mud brick walls catch the sunlight. This is the material from which much of southern Mesopotamia is built. Stone is scarce in the alluvial plain, and timber suitable for major construction must often arrive from distant regions. Mud, however, is everywhere, so mud becomes houses, mud becomes walls, mud becomes temples. Even writing begins in mud. There is something quietly appropriate about that. The civilization remembered for some of humanity's earliest surviving literature builds much of its world from a substance that can dissolve beneath rain. Yet when the same earth is shaped into tablets and baked by accident, fire, or deliberate treatment, words can survive thousands of years. The buildings often vanish. The sentences remain. Your footsteps now lead toward a settlement clustered around a sacred precinct. The tallest structure dominates the skyline, rising above flat roofs and courtyards. You do not need to imagine a perfectly preserved monument. Most ancient temples were rebuilt repeatedly. Foundations were renewed, walls thickened, rooms altered, and sacred spaces raised above older layers. Over generations, entire buildings could accumulate beneath later buildings like buried memories. Archaeologists at sites such as Nippur and Eridu have documented these long sequences of rebuilding. Each layer gives historians a glimpse of changing political authority, religious practice, and urban organization. Eridu is especially important tonight. Later, Mesopotamian tradition remembered it as one of the oldest cities, and it became closely associated with Enki. Excavations revealed a long sequence of sacred buildings at the site, suggesting that religious activity there extended deep into prehistory. Exactly how later literary memory relates to those early archaeological layers remains debated. A temple foundation does not explain a myth. A myth does not date a wall. The connection is tempting, but careful scholars keep the two forms of evidence separate until they can be compared responsibly. That caution follows you into the city. The streets are narrower now. Mud brick walls rise close on both sides, their surfaces rough beneath your fingertips. Shade brings temporary relief, though warmth still lingers in the walls. From an open doorway comes the smell of onions and cooked grain. A child carries a small vessel past you. A dog sleeps in dust. History is often introduced through kings and wars, monumental inscriptions, but most ancient lives occur here. In spaces like these, people repair roofs, prepare meals, bargain, borrow, marry, argue, worship, and worry about harvests. They also gossip. That part requires no excavation. Somewhere in this city, a merchant complains that silver has been weighed unfairly. Somewhere else, a brewer measures grain. A priest prepares offerings. A labourer returns from canal work with mud drying around his ankles. Above all of them stands the temple economies. Temples in early Mesopotamian cities controlled significant resources, employed workers, received offerings, and managed land. Their exact economic role varied across places and periods, and historians continue debating how centralized these institutions truly were. The older image of a completely temple-controlled society has been softened by later research. Private households mattered, palaces mattered, merchants mattered, families mattered. The city was never a single machine. Still, temples remained powerful centers where economy, religion, storage, administration, and political symbolism could overlap. That brings you closer to the tablet world. Writing did not first emerge because poets suddenly felt inspired beneath the moonlight. The earliest surviving written documents from southern Mesopotamia are largely administrative. Lists, accounts, quantities, commodities, very romantic. Yet from this practical system eventually grew hymns, laments, myths, royal praise, wisdom literature, school exercises, and narratives about gods who shape the structure of existence. The transition took centuries. By the time scribes copied elaborate compositions about Enki, writing had become capable of preserving complex religious imagination. But beneath that literary beauty still lies the older habit of classification. Assign this field, measure this grain, record this worker. Name this office, distribute this responsibility. Perhaps that is why the Sumerian divine world sometimes feels administrative. The gods organize rivers, they establish crafts, they appoint functions, they determine social roles, they distribute powers across the world almost as a great household might distribute labour. You begin to understand why Enki fits so naturally into this environment. A god of wisdom and organisation belongs in a civilization that survives through careful management of unstable water and scarce resources. But there is a stranger layer. Some ancient traditions describe civilization itself as something granted, ordered or distributed by the gods rather than gradually invented by humans. Kingship descends, crafts possess divine foundations, social institutions have sacred legitimacy. Even musical forms and priestly roles can belong to a cosmic arrangement. That idea will matter later. For now, you keep walking. The sun lowers, shadows lengthen between buildings, and lamps begin appearing inside rooms. Smoke from cooking fires hangs lightly above the settlement. The city grows quieter without becoming silent. You hear wooden doors closing. Reeds rustle. Someone sings in the distance. A temple worker crosses a courtyard carrying a basket of bread toward an offering place. The scent of warm grain follows him briefly, and you begin to notice something important about this world. The sacred is not separate from daily life. The gods are not confined to occasional festivals. They exist within fields, rivers, buildings, contracts, royal ceremonies, childbirth, illness, storms, dreams, and household rituals. A person might never see the inside of the most restricted sanctuary, yet divine presence surrounds ordinary existence. That closeness creates comfort. It also creates anxiety. If the world depends upon divine order, then disorder can feel like more than bad luck. A failed harvest may suggest anger. A strange dream may carry warning. An eclipse may demand interpretation. A damaged temple may require ritual repair. Scholars continue debating how ordinary people personally understood these signs, because elite texts do not always reveal everyday belief clearly. Still, surviving prayers, letters, omen texts, and household objects suggest a society deeply attentive to relationships between visible events and invisible powers. You pause beside another canal. Night has nearly arrived. The water reflects a thin band of fading colour while insects move above the surface. Beyond the darkening roofs, the sacred precinct remains visible. Somewhere inside that complex, perhaps generations from now, a scribe will copy words about Enki. He will write of waters beneath the earth. He will write of divine order. He will write of a sanctuary whose power causes even the Anunnaki to hesitate. But now that line feels different. You have seen the landscape that produced it. You have felt the mud beneath the walls. You have watched a civilization survive by boundaries, channels, measurement, and carefully controlled access. Nothing here exists without order. Perhaps the gods reflect that same need. Perhaps sacred boundaries are not decorative ideas, but mirrors of a society that understands how dangerous uncontrolled forces can become. A river without banks destroys fields. A storehouse without rules empties quickly. A city without authority fractures. And perhaps, in the imagination of ancient Sumer, even divine power requires limits. The night settles more deeply now. The city becomes a cluster of low shapes beneath the stars, while canal water moves almost invisibly through the darkness. You cannot yet see the hidden structure behind the gods, but you can feel it forming. Something is being organized, something is being remembered, and beneath the silence of southern Mesopotamia, the clay is already waiting. The clay waiting beneath your hands is cool at first, softer than you expect, and marked by the faint smell of wet earth. You are no longer walking beside the canal. Now you sit indoors, perhaps in a scribal courtyard where sunlight enters from above and settles across packed floors. Around you are baskets of tablets, reed styluses, fragments of broken exercises, and the quiet concentration of people learning how to make memory permanent. The room is not silent. A teacher corrects someone nearby, see? A stylus taps against clay, sandals scrape across the floor. Outside, a cart creaks past, and for a moment the ordinary city presses against this smaller world of writing. Then your attention returns to the tablet. Before the great stories came accounts. Before hymns to the gods came quantities of grain as numbers of animals, labour assignments, and deliveries of beer. Researchers studying the earliest writing from Uruk have shown that many of humanity's oldest surviving written records were administrative. Institutions needed ways to track goods, workers, fields, and obligations across increasingly complex urban communities. The first scribes were not composing bedtime mythology, they were doing paperwork. Somewhere, perhaps, an ancient clerk is still offended that this sounds less glamorous, yet the paperwork changes everything. Once information can be fixed outside human memory, authority changes with it. A transaction can outlast the witness who saw it. A list can move between officials. A ruler can command across distance. A temple can remember who owes what after everyone involved has gone home. The clay becomes a second memory. That is the mainstream historical fact you should hold closely here. Writing in southern Mesopotamia emerges gradually from systems of record keeping during the late 4th millennium before the Common Era. It does not appear fully formed, signs change, methods change, languages change, and over centuries, the wedge-shaped impressions you now associate with cuneiform become capable of carrying far more than numbers and commodities. You watch that transformation in your mind. A sign that once helps count grain begins taking on sounds. A symbol becomes flexible. A mark that once records an object can participate in a sentence. Suddenly the clay can hold speech, not perfectly, not simply, but enough. The consequences are enormous. A king's name can survive his body. A hymn can be copied generations later. A legal judgment can be preserved. A prayer can cross centuries. And eventually, a student can sit in a schoolroom and copy a composition about Enki, the Anuna, and the ordered structure of the world. The room around you grows more detailed. Stacks of clay lie near the wall. Some pieces are tiny, others are broad enough to require both hands. A student presses signs into one side, then turns the tablet carefully. Another may copy a model provided by a teacher, repeating difficult signs until the hand learns what the eye already understands. Scribal education was demanding. Evidence from old Babylonian school tablets shows repeated lexical exercises, sign lists, proverbs, model contracts, and literary passages. Scholars at institutions such as the University of Chicago and Yale have used these surviving exercises to reconstruct parts of scribal training. You begin to see the hidden machinery of preservation. A story does not survive because one inspired poet writes it once. It survives because somebody copies it. Then another person copies that copy. Then someone corrects a damaged version. Then a student makes mistakes. Then another student makes different mistakes. The process is wonderfully human. Perfection is not required. Persistence is. That is why ancient literature often reaches you through fragments rather than a single complete original. One tablet may preserve the beginning. Another may contain a middle passage. A third may preserve lines missing elsewhere. Modern scholars compare them. They reconstruct sequences. They identify repeated phrases. Sometimes they disagree, and sometimes one tiny broken corner changes how an entire passage is understood. The phrase about the Anuna hesitating before Enki's sanctuary belongs to precisely this kind of world. It reaches you because scribes copied traditions, yet the copies themselves may be much later than the religious ideas they preserve. That distance creates one of the great scholarly debates surrounding ancient Mesopotamian literature. How much of an old Babylonian composition preserves genuinely older Sumerian tradition, and how much reflects the intellectual world of later scribes? There is no single answer. Some compositions likely draw upon ancient cult traditions. Others may have been reshaped extensively. Still others could preserve older names inside newer literary structures. You are walking through layers. The tablet is not a transparent window. It is more like a room filled with older rooms. For a moment, your mind drifts towards something stranger. Ancient Mesopotamian scribes sometimes copied texts whose practical meaning may already have become obscure. Ritual instructions, unusual sign forms, ancient lexical traditions, and archaic spellings could acquire prestige because they belong to the learned past. That gives writing a peculiar power. Old words can become sacred partly because they are old. A phrase becomes more mysterious as fewer people understand it. Human beings have been doing this for a very long time. You can almost hear a weary student wondering why the teacher insists on preserving an obsolete sign. The teacher probably has an excellent answer, or perhaps merely a stick. The surviving school world has its quirky side. Some student texts contain complaints about lazy pupils, strict teachers, difficult lessons, and the endless burden of copying. A scribal education could be socially prestigious, but prestige rarely makes homework pleasant. That small detail changes the room. These were not faceless technicians. They became tired. They made errors. They wanted approval. They competed. And through their boredom, ambition, discipline, and repetition, the voices of the gods survived. You turn the clay again. The surface catches the light differently now. Each wedge has depth. Writing is not simply drawn upon the tablet. It is impressed into it, creating tiny shadows that shift depending on the angle of illumination. A skilled reader does not merely look. The reader studies shape, spacing, direction, context. Imagine doing that after several thousand years of erosion. No wonder interpretation demands patience. This is why sensational certainty should make you cautious. If someone tells you that one ancient tablet clearly reveals a hidden technological secret, a forbidden extraterrestrial ruler, or a lost machine, you should remember the scribal room, remember the broken copies, remember the shifting meanings, remember the signs whose readings depend upon context. The real difficulty is far more interesting than the easy claim. Ancient texts survive imperfectly because ancient people were not writing for us. They wrote for themselves. Their assumptions remain unstated. Their metaphors belong to their culture. Their gods carry histories that may already have been centuries old, and you are arriving late, very late. Still, the clay welcomes you. Not clearly, not completely, but enough. You begin recognizing patterns within the surviving divine literature. The gods are rarely isolated figures. They exist in families and assemblies. They hold powers that relate to cities and natural forces. They receive temples. They participate in decisions. They travel. They praise one another. They occasionally resist one another. And their relationships seem to reflect both cosmic order and human social structures. This is where the tablet begins doing something subtle. It turns divine hierarchy into narrative. Instead of telling you abstractly that one god possesses great authority, a hymn shows other gods responding to him. Instead of explaining that a sanctuary is sacred, a poet shows even divine beings stopping before its threshold. Behavior reveals rank. Silence reveals distance. Reverence reveals power. You're beginning to understand why that one line matters. It may not reveal a forbidden being in the modern sense, but it reveals how ancient writers imagined boundaries among gods. And that may lead somewhere deeper. The room is quieter now. Perhaps the lesson has ended. Students carry damp tablets towards shelves or baskets, while unfinished exercises remain scattered across the floor. A teacher inspects one final line beneath fading light. You remain seated. The tablet before you has become dry enough to hold its shape. Its signs are fixed. Someone could drop it tomorrow and shatter it. A wall could collapse upon it. Fire could harden it. Centuries could bury it. An archaeologist might eventually lift a fragment from the earth and recognize that the scratches are not scratches at all. They have voices. That is the quiet miracle. Empires disappear, rivers change course, temples fall, languages stop being spoken, yet a sentence survives because someone once pressed a reed into mud. And among those surviving sentences are names: Enki, Enlil, An, the Anuna. Names that once belonged to living worship now rest in museums and scholarly editions. Before you can understand why one divine group hesitates before another power, you must first meet those names as their ancient writers understood them. Not as modern visitors from the stars, not yet as mysteries, but as members of an old divine society whose structure is only beginning to emerge from the clay. The names now begin to gather around you like figures emerging from darkness. Not all at once. That would be too easy. The divine world of ancient Mesopotamia does not arrange itself into a neat family tree that remains unchanged across every city and century. Gods rise in importance, names shift, titles overlap, local traditions develop their own emphasis, and scribes preserve visions that do not always agree. You begin with the group that matters most tonight, the Anuna. Modern audiences often encounter another form of the name first, Anunnaki, usually attached to claims about visitors from another world. Yet the older Sumerian texts present something very different. They describe divine beings. More precisely, they describe a group of gods whose number, membership, and function can vary depending upon the composition. That variation matters. In some texts, they appear as a great divine assembly. Elsewhere, they are connected with judgment, cosmic order, or the underworld. In later Akkadian traditions, their identity becomes even less uniform. There is no single ancient paragraph explaining exactly who they are. You have fragments, you have patterns, you have repetition, and you have disagreement. Your ears catch the imagined sound of sandals crossing a temple courtyard, while priests prepare offerings beneath the evening sky. Names are spoken quietly, perhaps in prayers or hymns, each one carrying centuries of accumulated meaning. The gods are not merely characters, they belong to places. Enki belongs especially to Eridu. Enlil belongs especially to Nippur. Inanna carries enormous importance at Uruk. Nanna is closely associated with Ur. The sacred geography of Mesopotamia is therefore also political geography. A city's god can become part of that city's identity. When a city rises in prestige, its deity may also receive greater theological importance. When royal power shifts, ancient traditions can be reorganized around new centers. Researchers from the University of Chicago have long emphasized how Mesopotamian religion developed through this interaction between local cults, political change, and scribal tradition. That gives you a mainstream foundation. The pantheon is structured, but never frozen. Imagine a council whose membership changes over centuries. Old offices remain. New authorities appear, genealogies are adjusted. A deity prominent in one city becomes subordinate in another tradition. It sounds complicated because it was complicated. Human societies rarely create simple heavens. The Anuna belong inside this changing landscape. Their name is often understood in relation to the god An, the great sky deity. Ancient compositions sometimes portray them as divine descendants or members of a higher assembly associated with major cosmic authority, but do not imagine a fixed number. That is one of the modern traps. Later popular theories often speak confidently of a precise group, sometimes presenting them almost like a biological species with membership records conveniently preserved for modern readers. The tablets are less cooperative. Different texts use the term differently. Sometimes small group seems implied, sometimes a larger assembly appears. Some later traditions place Anunnaki among underworld judges, while others connect them with major heavenly gods. The category moves. That unsettled quality has produced a long scholarly debate. Historians still discuss whether the term originally described a specific council, a broad class of major deities, descendants of An, or a title whose function changed across periods. The evidence allows patterns. It rarely allows simplicity. You now imagine the divine assembly itself. There is no single surviving painting showing the scene exactly as Sumerian poets imagined it. Instead, you build the picture from hymns, myths, seals, temple art, and ritual language. The gods sit in order. Perhaps senior figures occupy places of honor. Decisions are announced. Destinies are fixed. Messengers move between divine realms. Petitions are heard. Authority flows through rank. It feels strangely administrative again. The resemblance to human government is probably not accidental. Mesopotamian kings rule through courts, officials, scribes, messengers, labor systems, and temples. The divine world is imagined with similar structures, though elevated into cosmic proportions. If human order depends upon hierarchy, perhaps cosmic order does as well. That possibility follows you. One unusual detail appears again and again across ancient Mesopotamian religion. Gods can possess astonishing power, while still depending upon relationships with other gods. They negotiate, they appeal, they seek decisions from assemblies, they can even be restrained by cosmic order. Divinity does not always mean unlimited freedom. That idea is important. Very important. Because if the Anunna are powerful gods, then their hesitation before Enki's sanctuary becomes more meaningful. Powerful beings are usually most interesting when something stops them, but you are not ready to return to that threshold yet. First, you need to understand what the Anunna are not. They are not described in Sumerian texts as astronauts arriving from a distant planet. No Sumerian tablet says they came from a world called Nibiru to mine gold. No ancient composition explains that they genetically engineered humanity using advanced laboratory technology. Those ideas belong to modern reinterpretation. The genuine texts are stranger in quieter ways. They place divine beings inside a universe where waters beneath the earth have sacred meaning, where decrees shape reality, and where civilization itself can be treated as something distributed by gods. That may not satisfy someone hoping for ancient spaceships, but it gives you a more haunting question. What did the Sumerians believe power actually was? Perhaps not machinery, perhaps not physical strength, perhaps authority itself could be sacred. A decree spoken by the correct god might carry more weight than an army. A temple boundary could be more serious than a wall. A name could contain status. A ritual could preserve order. This way of thinking is difficult for a modern mind because you're accustomed to separating religion, government, economics, and nature into different categories. The Sumerians did not necessarily divide their world so cleanly. A river could be practical and divine. A king could be political and sacred. A temple could be religious and economic. A god could represent cosmic force and social authority simultaneously. The categories overlap. One quirky detail helps bring this world closer. Some divine lists from Mesopotamia arrange gods almost like carefully maintained archives, grouping names, spouses, children, attendants, officials, and associated beings. The divine realm can look remarkably organized on clay. Even heaven needs record keeping. You might smile at that, then you notice something underneath the humour. Lists preserve hierarchy. A name placed beside another name reveals relationship. A sequence can reveal importance. The act of writing the gods down is itself an attempt to organize the invisible. Perhaps scribes are not merely recording belief. Perhaps they are constructing a map, and maps always tell you where boundaries lie. Your mind drifts toward the title that brought you here. The being the Anunnaki were forbidden to challenge. Already, the wording begins to change under examination. There may be no single forbidden being. There may instead be a network of divine limits. An outranks certain gods. Enlil commands extraordinary authority. Enki controls sacred knowledge and deep waters. Other great deities possess their own spheres. The Anuna participate within this system rather than standing above it. That is more subtle than a hidden ruler. It is also more believable, and perhaps more unsettling, because a hidden ruler can be named, a system is harder to see. The scholarly question remains open over how much these divine hierarchies reflect actual temple institutions and how much they belong to literary imagination. Researchers at Oxford and Yale have approached this issue from different angles, comparing ritual texts, hymns, administrative documents, and mythological compositions. No single type of evidence tells the whole story. A hymn praises, an account records, a myth explains, a ritual performs. Together, they create a world. You remain inside that world now. The night air grows cooler above the city, somewhere. Offerings are being prepared beneath lamplight. The names of gods pass from one generation to another, and Enlil, Enki, Inanna, Nanna, and among them, the Anuna. Not aliens, not yet underworld judges alone, or not a perfectly defined council. They are something older and more fluid, a divine collective, a memory of hierarchy, a group whose identity shifts as Mesopotamia itself changes. And once you understand that, the mystery becomes quieter. The question is no longer, who were these mysterious visitors? The question becomes more ancient. Who had authority over the gods that answer weights higher in the divine order? Above temples, above kings, above the assembly itself. And somewhere beyond the city lights, the sky is already hearing his name. The sky above you seems wider now. It stretches beyond the city walls, beyond the canals, beyond the fields where workers move beneath the last light. The stars appear one by one. And the old world begins arranging itself according to patterns that human beings believe existed before any king took a throne. You are moving backward now, not merely through centuries, but through memory. The Sumerians preserved traditions that imagined a time before ordinary political history, when kingship itself had not yet become a human possession. In one famous composition, later called the Sumerian King List, kingship is said to descend from heaven before passing through a sequence of ancient cities. The statement is brief, its implications are enormous. Kingship is not invented, it arrives. That idea is one of the clearest examples of how political authority could be placed inside a sacred framework. Researchers at Oxford, the University of Pennsylvania, and the Oriental Institute at Chicago have studied copies of the King List and related royal traditions, showing how scribes use the past to explain legitimacy in the present. The surviving versions do not always agree, names change, cities shift, lengths of reign become astonishing, yet the structure remains recognizable. Authority comes first from above, then humans receive it. You picture the earliest city named in the sequence, Eridu. The association is difficult to ignore, because Eridu is also the city most closely connected with Enki. That does not prove that the King List preserves literal prehistoric memory. Modern scholarship treats its earliest reigns cautiously, particularly because some rulers are assigned spans of time far beyond a human lifespan. Still, the tradition tells you something important about how later Mesopotamian scribes understood beginnings. The first order was divine and main. Human rule came afterward. This distinction matters because the world you're entering is not a world where gods occasionally interfere in human politics. It is the reverse. Human politics appears to be a reflection of something older. The scent of damp earth rises from the canal bank beside you. Night insects hum in the reeds. Far away, a dog barks twice and falls silent. You imagine an ancient listener hearing a priest recite names of rulers whose reigns extend for tens of thousands of years. There is something almost dreamlike about those numbers. A king rules for an age, then another rules longer, then a city falls. Kingship moves, the pattern repeats. Some modern readers seize upon these impossible reigns as proof that the rulers were not human. Others interpret them as encoded astronomy, lost calendars, or memories of beings with extraordinary lifespans. These are fringe possibilities. The tablets themselves do not explain the numbers in that way. A more conventional interpretation sees the enormous reign lengths as part of mythic chronology, a literary device used to place the earliest rulers in a sacred and distant age, even here. However, scholars debate the details. Were the numbers symbolic? Did they emerge from scribal mathematical conventions? Did different versions preserve competing political traditions? Or were later editors combining material from several older sources? No single explanation satisfies every problem. That uncertainty keeps the ancient horizon open. You look again toward Eridu. The city lies low against the plain. Long before monumental empires appear in Mesopotamia, communities are already building and rebuilding sacred structures there. Archaeological work revealed a deep sequence of temples beneath the later ruins, each one resting above an earlier phase, layer under layer, sanctuary under sanctuary. The physical site itself seems to imitate the literary tradition. Every present stands upon an older sacred past. One of the quirks of Mesopotamian memory is that cities often claimed extraordinary antiquity for their sacred institutions. A temple was not merely an impressive building constructed by recent rulers. Ideally, it belonged to the beginning. Kings restored temples rather than simply building them. In inscriptions, they might present themselves as rediscovering ancient foundations, renewing old plans, or returning a sanctuary to its proper form. This language is politically useful. It makes innovation look like restoration, a clever trick. Human beings still appreciate it, but in ancient Mesopotamia the claim reaches deeper, because legitimacy depends upon continuity with divine order. A king does not rule merely because he is strong. He rules because the gods have granted kingship. A temple does not matter merely because it is large. It matters because its place within the world has been established by divine authority. A city does not become sacred through popularity. Its sacred status belongs to a much older arrangement, and slowly you realize why the hidden timeline matters. If the gods established order before human kingship, then human civilization enters the story late. There is a before, a time when divine beings possess offices, territories, relationships, and responsibilities while humans are absent or not yet central. You do not need to imagine spaceships to find that unsettling. The texts themselves already place humanity downstream from a larger system, long before recorded history, in a time that is no longer remembered. The stories imagine divine decisions unfolding before human institutions take their familiar shape. Perhaps that is poetry? Perhaps theology? Perhaps royal ideology? Perhaps all three? The exact balance remains debated. Yale historians and other specialists in ancient Near Eastern kingship have emphasized that texts like the King List should not be read as straightforward chronicles. They are selective compositions, shaped by politics and memory. That makes them valuable in another way. They show what scribes wanted the past to mean, and what they wanted it to mean was order. One city receives kingship, then another. Power moves according to a pattern. Catastrophe interrupts. Authority is restored elsewhere. The structure resembles a cycle, Not random change and not simple chaos. A sequence. Your mind begins connecting this with the divine assembly. If kingship descends, someone must grant it. If divine offices exist, someone must establish them. If even gods respect rank, then hierarchy must reach upward beyond the visible political world. This is where the old sky god enters the edge of the story. And his name is simple, his position is not. In many traditions he appears distant, elevated, ancient, associated with heaven itself and with ultimate authority. Yet he does not always behave like an active monarch, moving through every myth. Sometimes distance is part of power. The highest authority does not need to shout. The thought settles quietly, and you can almost feel the divine order stretching above the city, a human king below, temple above him, major gods above the temple, an assembly beyond them. And somewhere at the highest level, the source of legitimacy remains remote, but the system does not move in only one direction. Enlil will become crucial, Enki will become crucial, different cities elevate different divine relationships. That is why no neat pyramid can explain everything. Ancient theology resists diagrams. Still, the pattern persists. Humanity inherits. The gods precede. The divine world is older. You return to the king list for a moment. The earliest rulers are separated from later historical kings by impossible stretches of time. Then comes catastrophe, often connected in later interpretation with the Great Flood tradition. Afterward, kingship begins again. The sequence feels like memory divided into 8. Before, destruction, after. That pattern will return. For now, you remain in the first age. No empire has conquered the horizon. No famous conqueror has yet carved his victories into stone. No palace archive has recorded tribute from distant lands. The story is still close to the beginning. The canals move through darkness. The temples rise above older temples. The gods already possess names, and humanity, in the logic of the tradition, is not yet the centre of anything. Perhaps that is the first hidden truth beneath the clay. The Sumerian imagination does not begin with us. It begins with order, with divine cities, with powers already distributed, with authority already descending, and only later does humanity step into the system. You listen to the water beside the reeds. The city behind you is quiet. Somewhere beyond the visible horizon lies another sacred centre, Nippur, where the next layer of authority will become clearer. Before human kings rule the land, the gods already have a hierarchy. Before the palace, there is the assembly. Before the assembly speaks, there is the sky. And above the darkened plain, that ancient sky is waiting. The sky waiting above you is no longer merely empty darkness. It has become a place of authority. You stand beneath it as someone in ancient Sumer might have done, looking upward from a courtyard where the last lamp flame trembles beside a mud brick wall. The night is clear, the air cooler now, and the stars appear almost sharp enough to touch. Above everything is An. He is not always the loudest god. He does not always dominate the most dramatic myths, yet his importance rests precisely in that distance. An is the ancient sky god, one of the oldest and highest figures in the Mesopotamian pantheon. His name becomes linked with heaven itself, and his position often carries the weight of ultimate divine legitimacy. Records from early Mesopotamian religion confirm that An held enormous prestige, especially at Uruk, where he was associated with the sacred precinct later shared with Inanna. Scholars at Yale, Chicago, and Oxford have long noted the peculiar character of his authority. He is supreme in rank, yet he can seem strangely remote. You begin to understand why. A ruler who constantly intervenes must constantly prove control. A ruler who stands beyond challenge needs no such display. At least, that is how the poetry can make it feel. You imagine the divine assembly beneath him. Enlil holds immense active power. Enki controls deep wisdom and sacred order. Inanna commands a very different kind of force. Nanna, Utu, and other great deities occupy their own cosmic spheres. Yet, En remains above them, as the celestial source from which authority can descend. The image is simple, the structure is not. Ancient Mesopotamian theology develops over many centuries, and no single text gives you a permanent constitutional chart of heaven. Different cities emphasize different divine relationships, while royal ideology can shift theological emphasis according to political needs. Still, and repeatedly appears near the summit, your mind drifts toward an ancient temple courtyard. Incense smoke rises into darkness. A priest lifts his hands. There are no grand philosophical explanations. There are names, titles, offerings, formulae. The ritual does not argue that An is powerful, it assumes it. Vyan's assumption is one of the most important forms of evidence. A god does not need many stories to hold high rank. Sometimes position is revealed through how other gods are described in relation to him. In genealogies, divine lists, hymns, and royal inscriptions, he frequently appears as a father or ancestral authority. Even when he is not acting directly, his approval can matter. Authority becomes almost architectural. It sits above. It legitimizes what happens below. That brings you closer to the question you have been circling since the first tablet. If the Anunna belong to a divine assembly associated with the lineage or authority of An, then they are not a group floating free from all hierarchy. They belong to a structure. Their very identity may point upward. This is one reason the older Sumerian form of the name matters. The Anunna can be understood as those connected with An, though scholars remain careful about reducing the term to a single fixed definition. Language preserves relationships imperfectly. Myth preserves them even more strangely. The open debate here concerns how literally divine genealogy should be understood. When a text calls one god the father of another, does it describe a theological family tree, or does it express rank, political dependence, cultic inheritance, perhaps several meanings at once? Researchers studying ancient Near Eastern religion often warn against treating divine family language like a modern birth certificate. The gods are not ordinary biological beings, they are divine powers expressed through social relationships familiar to human society. Fatherhood can mean ancestry, it can mean authority, it can mean legitimacy. That ambiguity becomes useful because An's power is often less about what he does than about what he authorizes. A decision can carry his sanction, a ruler can claim his favor, a god can receive authority through association with him. And when you think about the phrase forbidden to challenge, this matters far more than any imagined confrontation. Divine order may function through recognized rank. You do not challenge because the system itself tells you where you stand. No guard is needed, no shouted command. The hierarchy is already understood. That is a much quieter kind of prohibition. Perhaps a more ancient one. You walk through the imagined city of Uruk now. Its streets are dark except for scattered lamplight. The walls feel rough beneath your hand, and a faint smell of baked bread hangs near one doorway. Far above the roofs, the sacred precinct rises. Uruk becomes one of the most important cities in early Mesopotamian history. Archaeological work there revealed monumental buildings, administrative tablets, and evidence for some of the earliest large-scale urban organization. The city is also tied deeply to An and Inanna. This combination is intriguing. An represents remote celestial authority. Inanna represents movement, ambition, sexuality, conflict, and political force. The divine world contains both distance and intensity. Human society does too. One quirky detail survives in later literature. Even powerful gods sometimes seek decisions, weapons, powers, or privileges through other divine authorities rather than simply taking them. The gods negotiate status, they petition, they obtain permission, they occasionally ignore permission and create trouble. So heaven is not exactly peaceful. It is organized. There is a difference. You can almost hear a celestial administrator clearing his throat. The joke fades quickly, because the pattern is significant. If gods need authorization, then divine power is not unlimited. That is one of the hidden structures slowly emerging from the tablets. Power is distributed, authority is layered, knowledge is restricted. Sacred places have boundaries. The gods operate inside a system. An stands near the top of that system, yet even his supremacy is not expressed uniformly. In some compositions, Enlil appears to wield more immediate authority over earthly affairs. In others, Enki's wisdom becomes decisive. Later, Babylonian theology will elevate Marduk. Political change affects the heavens. Or perhaps the heavens are used to explain political change. The direction is difficult to separate. That is why scholars continue debating the relationship between cult theology and state power. Adsio. Did kings shape the divine hierarchy to reflect political reality? Did sacred tradition constrain what rulers could claim? Did both develop together? The evidence points in several directions. You do not need a final answer tonight. You only need to notice the pattern. The gods are not equals. Some speak with greater authority. Some control specialized domains. Some appear ancestral. Some act as judges. Some remain remote. And the Anuna exist within that unequal world. The title that brought you here becomes softer again. Perhaps no mysterious being ever issued a literal command forbidding challenge. Perhaps the deeper idea is that certain levels of authority were simply beyond contest, and may represent one such level, but he's not yet the figure standing at the threshold that first disturbed you. That figure remains Enki, and between An's distant sky and Enki's hidden waters stands another power, Enlil. If An is heaven's authority, Enlil is its command, his name will become tied to wind, kingship, decree, and the force that makes order move through the world. He is less distant, more immediate, more political, and far more difficult to ignore. The stars above you seem colder now. You imagine An beyond them, not as a man seated on a cloud, but as the abstract height from which legitimacy descends. No wall surrounds him, no weapon needs to be raised. His authority is older than the king below, older than the city, older, perhaps, than the stories that try to explain him. And beneath that distant sky, the other gods still arrange themselves. They gather, they decide, they wait, they obey. At least most of the time, the quiet mystery deepens. If even divine beings possess rank, then the question is no longer whether the gods can be challenged. The question is what happens when one divine authority collides with another. That answer waits in the wind. The wind reaches you before Enlil does. It moves through the reeds beside the canal, presses dust along the street, and lifts the edge of a woven cloth hanging from a doorway. You hear it before you fully notice it, a soft pressure moving through the city without shape. For the Sumerians, this invisible force belongs naturally beside authority. Enlil becomes one of the most powerful gods in ancient Mesopotamian religion, especially at Nippur, where his great sanctuary stood at the religious center of the land. His name carries the sense of lordship over air, wind, and the space between heaven and earth. Yet weather alone does not explain him. He is also a god of command, a god of decree, a god whose approval can determine kingship and whose decisions can shape the fate of cities. That combination makes him difficult to ignore. You leave the quiet courtyards of Uruk behind and move northward in your imagination. Following canals across the flat plain toward Nippur, the city does not always dominate Mesopotamia politically. That is precisely what makes its sacred importance remarkable. For centuries, rulers from other cities sought legitimacy through association with Enlil's sanctuary there. Kings who controlled distant capitals still presented themselves as favoured by Nippur. Authority, once again, does not belong only to armies. It belongs to recognition. Archaeological work at Nippur, including major excavations associated with the University of Pennsylvania and the Oriental Institute of Chicago, revealed temples, administrative archives, school tablets, and long occupational sequences. The city became one of the most important places for reconstructing Sumerian literary culture. Many compositions you read today survive because scribes copied them there. That means the voice of Enlil reaches you through both theology and archaeology. You can almost hear the place. Footsteps pass through a temple gate. A bronze fitting knocks softly against wood. Someone carries flour for offerings. A priest recites words that have already been recited many times before. At the centre of this sacred world stands Enlil's temple, known in later scholarship through the ancient name Ekur. Its meaning evokes a great mountain house. That image is striking in a land almost completely flat. Southern Mesopotamia has no or mountain rising above Nippur, so the temple becomes one. Sacred architecture creates the height the landscape does not provide. You look upward. Mud brick platforms rise above courtyards and surrounding roofs. Perhaps the building is not enormous by modern standards, yet its symbolic scale is greater than its walls. This is where divine decision enters the human world. Records confirm that Mesopotamian kings repeatedly honoured Enlil, restored his temples, and invoked his authority in royal inscriptions. That is your mainstream historical anchor tonight. For much of Sumerian and early Mesopotamian history, Enlil occupies a position of extraordinary political and religious importance. If An represents the distant source of celestial legitimacy, Enlil often seems to exercise that legitimacy actively. He announces, he appoints, he grants, or he removes. The language of decree surrounds him, and this word, decree, deserves your attention. Modern readers often imagine ancient gods primarily through physical powers. A storm god throws lightning, a sun god shines, a war goddess fights. But Mesopotamian theology repeatedly treats spoken decisions as powers in themselves. When a high god determines a destiny, reality changes because authority has been expressed. The command is not merely advice, it becomes structure. You begin to sense why the divine assembly matters so much. A council of gods does more than discuss. It determines, it assigns, it judges. Certain divine decisions seem almost woven into the architecture of the cosmos. One ancient composition may describe a god receiving a function. Another may present a destiny being fixed. A royal hymn may tell you that kingship was granted through divine favour. These are different literary forms, yet they repeat the same idea. Order is pronounced. This creates a subtle problem for the modern imagination. What happens if a god disagrees? Can divine command be resisted? Sometimes, apparently, yes, Mesopotamian myths contain quarrels, deceptions, reversals, and competing desires among the gods. But resistance has consequences. The divine world is not an assembly of equal individuals politely exchanging opinions. Rank matters. Jurisdiction matters. The approval of senior gods matters. And Enlil frequently stands near the centre of that process. Your hands brush against a cool stone door socket near the imagined temple entrance. The stone is imported. That detail matters too. Mesopotamia lacks abundant local stone, so valuable materials often arrive through long-distance trade. A stone foundation piece or inscribed object, therefore, carries both practical and symbolic weight. Someone invested effort in bringing it here. The temple deserves resources. The god deserves permanence. Mud brick walls may decay. Stone remembers longer. One quirky detail from Mesopotamian literature makes Enlil's authority feel surprisingly human. Gods sometimes react to noise. In flood traditions preserved later in Akkadian, divine displeasure can be connected with the disturbance created by multiplying humanity. Imagine possessing cosmic authority and still wanting quiet neighbours. Even eternity has limits. The humour fades when you realise what the story implies. Human beings exist beneath powers that can respond to them unpredictably. A population grows, noise rises, a divine council reacts, disaster follows. These stories do not portray humanity as secure at the centre of creation. They portray humanity as dependent. That theme will become much more important later. For now, remain with Enlil. Scholars continue debating how early his supreme position developed and how closely his theological authority reflected the political importance of Nippur. Did Nippur become sacred because Enlil was already supreme? Did Enlil become supreme because Nippur became a religious centre? Or did both processes strengthen one another across generations? Research at Chicago, Pennsylvania, Oxford, and other institutions has approached the question through temple history, royal inscriptions, lexical texts, and changing divine genealogies. No single answer closes the debate. That is often the way with very ancient religion. Cause and belief grow together. You move deeper into the sanctuary, not literally. Certain spaces would have been restricted. That boundary matters. Ancient temples were not public museums where anyone could wander freely through every chamber. Access depended upon status, ritual purity, occupation, and sacred protocol. Some rooms belonged to priests, some belonged symbolically to the god, some objects could be seen only during specific ceremonies. Restriction creates meaning. A closed door tells you that what lies beyond is different. You remember Enki's sanctuary. The connection is becoming clearer. If human beings accept restricted access to divine places, could gods themselves also encounter sacred boundaries? The first tablet suggested they could. Enlil helps you understand why. In this religious world, power does not simply mean freedom to go anywhere. Power operates through order, Gishulgir. A god may possess tremendous authority while still recognizing another god's domain. One deity governs the storm, another governs wisdom, another controls the sun, another governs the underworld. Divine sovereignty is divided. That division creates both stability and tension. Perhaps this is the system you have been reconstructing. Not a single ruler commanding passive subordinates. A layered society of powers. Each office has limits. Each rank has expectations. Each sanctuary has a centre. And certain decisions belong only to certain gods. The wind grows stronger outside. Dust turns briefly in the courtyard. You can feel why Enlil becomes associated with an invisible force capable of changing everything. Wind cannot be held. It arrives. It presses against walls. It bends fields. It disappears without explanation. Authority can feel similar. A decree leaves no visible object behind, yet people obey. A king receives legitimacy. A city loses favour. A campaign begins. A temple is rebuilt. Human lives change because someone higher in the system has spoken. This does not make Enlil the mysterious being from the title. The tablets do not support such a simple identification, but he brings you closer to understanding why challenge itself carries meaning. To challenge a major god is not merely to confront strength, it is to confront jurisdiction. To resist a decree is to resist order. And in Mesopotamian thought, order is never entirely separate from survival. Canals must remain open, boundaries must be maintained. Offerings must be delivered, kings must perform their duties, temples must be cared for. The cosmos resembles the city again. Everything works because obligations are recognized. The old system becomes visible beneath the mythology and gives height. Enlil gives command, and somewhere below, beneath the earth and beneath the visible waters, Enki holds something neither of them possesses in quite the same way: knowledge, cunning. The deep reservoir of wisdom from which order can be shaped. The wind continues across Nippur. You listen until it becomes softer, then beneath it, another sound begins. Water, not rain, not river water, something older, something hidden below the world, and that is where you are going next. The water beneath you does not behave like a river. It has no visible current, no muddy bank, no reeds trembling along its edge. You cannot stand beside it in any ordinary sense, because this water belongs to a hidden geography beneath the known world. The Sumerians imagined such a place. They associated it closely with Enki. You have already met him at the edge of the mystery. Standing behind that strange sanctuary, the Anunna hesitate to approach. Now you descend toward his domain more carefully, following the idea of fresh water downward through temple tradition, myth, and ancient cosmology. The air seems cooler here. Stone would be rare in southern Mesopotamia, yet your imagination supplies dark chambers, wet surfaces, and a faint mineral scent rising from below. Somewhere in the distance, water echoes against an unseen wall. Enki's great sacred center is Eridu. You have been there before in memory, walking among the ancient temple layers buried beneath later construction. The city is one of the oldest known urban settlements in southern Mesopotamia, and its association with the Enki becomes deeply embedded in later religious tradition. Archaeology confirms the extraordinary antiquity of the sacred precinct at Eridu. Excavations revealed successive temple phases, built one above another across long periods, suggesting that the site retained religious importance for generations before the great literary compositions were copied. That is your firm historical ground, but now the ground opens. Enki is connected not merely with the city, but with the subterranean freshwater realm that later scholarship usually describes as a cosmic deep beneath the earth. For people living between rivers and marshes, this idea is not abstract. Freshwater means survival. Wells depend upon it, fields depend upon it, cities depend upon careful access to it. Water hidden below the soil can feel like a secret reserve beneath the visible world. Perhaps that helps explain why Enki's domain becomes associated with wisdom. Water is hidden. Knowledge is hidden. Both emerge when properly accessed. The comparison is poetic, but it fits the texture of the texts. You picture temple personnel carrying vessels through a dim courtyard. A ritual basin reflects the sky. Someone pours water slowly across a stone object. The sound is small. The meaning is not. Purification, fertility, renewal, and divine presence can all gather around water in Mesopotamian ritual. Enki stands near the center of that symbolism, yet he is never only a water god. He is also clever. He negotiates, he organizes, he solves problems other gods cannot easily solve. He possesses an intelligence that feels practical rather than distant. If An is height and Enlil is command, Enki is often the one who understands how a difficult system can actually be made to work. That gives him an unusual position. He can be subordinate in rank while indispensable in function. Those are not the same thing. Ancient hierarchies often understand this very well. A king may outrank an advisor. The advisor may still know where every problem is buried, sometimes literally. The thought carries a gentle sarcasm of its own. Even the gods apparently need someone who understands the paperwork. One curious feature of Enki's literary character is how often wisdom appears beside mischief. He is not simply solemn. He can be cunning, generous, vigorous, strategic, and occasionally inconvenient for other gods. That makes him unusually human in temperament. Despite the cosmic scale of his powers, you can feel why later storytellers kept returning to him. A completely predictable god produces a tidy theology. Enki produces stories. In one tradition, he helps humanity survive disaster. In another, he distributes the functions of civilization across the world elsewhere. He becomes entangled in complicated exchanges involving divine powers and other deities. The details vary, the pattern does not. Knowledge moves through him. This is where the mystery thickens. If Enki's sanctuary contains something the Anunna approach with caution, perhaps the awe comes not from brute strength, but from concentrated sacred knowledge. That is only a possibility. The text does not say so directly. You must keep that distinction clear. Mainstream scholarship does not describe Enki as the secret rule of the Anunnaki. It describes him as a major deity with exceptionally broad associations, including wisdom, freshwater, creation, magic, craftsmanship, and the ordering of civilization. Still, those associations create a meaningful question. What exactly does a god of wisdom possess? Not books, not in the modern sense, not laboratory instruments, not machines humming behind sealed doors. Instead, wisdom appears as the ability to understand relationships, assign functions, manipulate divine powers, and recognize how one part of the cosmos affects another. Knowledge is structural. It tells you where things belong. That kind of knowledge can be more powerful than a weapon. A weapon wins a confrontation. Knowledge prevents one. You continue downward. Your fingertips brush a cold wall in the imagined chamber. The surface is damp. A smell like wet clay surrounds you. There is no torch nearby, but the darkness seems less threatening than secretive. The old texts frequently associate Enki with abundance flowing outward from his domain. Rivers, fertility, crafts, institutions, and ordered functions can be represented as things he directs into the human world. The hidden place is therefore not isolated. It feeds civilization. That pattern matters. What is concealed below eventually appears above. You begin to see why Enki's sanctuary may be described with language of complexity and overwhelming sacred presence. Perhaps it is less a temple than a model of cosmic organization. Perhaps the poet imagines a place where the hidden structure of civilization is stored symbolically. That interpretation remains debated. Researchers at Oxford and Yale have examined these compositions through literary, linguistic, and religious approaches, while archaeologists studying Eridu provide a physical context that does not always align neatly with later texts. The sanctuary in poetry is not identical to the excavated building. That distinction is essential. An archaeological wall cannot prove a myth. A myth cannot reconstruct a floor plan. Still, the two can speak beside one another. The ancient city says, people worshipped here for a very long time. The literature says they believed something powerful belonged here. Together, they create atmosphere. You pause beside the imagined water. A faint ripple moves across its surface. Your reflection disappears before you can recognize it. Perhaps that is appropriate. Enki's world does not offer clear surfaces. It offers depth. The Sumerians themselves seem to understand wisdom this way. The obvious answer is rarely the whole answer. A god may obey one decree while quietly creating another possibility. A disaster may be announced. Yet survival remains possible through clever intervention. A divine power may be assigned, stolen, transferred, or redirected. Order exists, but intelligence can move within it. That creates tension with Enlil. Not necessarily open rebellion, something subtler. Enlil often represents command, Enki often represents solution. When those roles align, the cosmos functions smoothly. When they diverge, stories begin. This tension will matter later when humanity enters the divine system. For now, you remain with the older question: why would the Anuna hesitate before Enki's sanctuary? One explanation is ritual praise. The poet exaggerates the holiness of the place by showing major gods themselves keeping their distance. Another explanation might be theological hierarchy within that particular composition. A third possibility is that the sanctuary represents a boundary around knowledge or power considered uniquely Enki's. Scholars do not speak with one voice here. That uncertainty should remain open. There is no need to force the door. Some doors are more interesting closed. You listen again. Water moves somewhere beneath the floor. The sound is steady now. You begin to notice how different this domain feels from An's sky and Enlil's wind. An is distant. Enlil is commanding. Enki is intimate. He is close to the substances that sustain human life. Water, clay, craft, birth, skill, ritual knowledge, the materials of civilization gather around him. That may explain why he feels almost dangerously useful. A distant god can remain mysterious. A useful god must interact. An interaction creates influence. Your mind returns to the ancient city above. Fishermen cross marsh channels before dawn. Potters shape wet clay. Priests measure offerings. Scribes copy signs. Canal workers repair banks. Brewers prepare grain. Metal workers handle imported materials with care. Every craft depends upon knowledge. Every institution depends upon someone knowing what to do. Perhaps Enki becomes the divine expression of that invisible competence. The world works because somebody understands it. That thought is comforting and slightly unsettling, because the one who understands the system may hold a different kind of power from the one who officially rules it. You let the idea settle. No conclusion yet. Only another piece of the structure, above, and represents legitimacy. Across the land, Enlil issues command. Below, Enki keeps the hidden patterns, and between them move the Anuna, divine beings whose own place within the hierarchy remains uncertain. The mystery is becoming less like a confrontation, more like architecture. Layers above layers, authority above knowledge, knowledge beneath authority, sacred boundaries between them. And somewhere inside that architecture lies the sanctuary the gods do not casually enter. You are closer now. Close enough to hear the water beneath its floor. Close enough to feel the cool air rising from the threshold, but not yet close enough to cross it. The threshold is finally before you. For several sections, you have moved toward it slowly, through cities, temples, councils, rivers, and the hidden waters associated with Enki. Now the distance has narrowed until there is nowhere else to look. You stand before the sanctuary. The ancient composition does not offer you a modern architectural plan. It does not tell you the dimensions of every chamber, the material of every doorway, or the exact arrangement of sacred furniture. Instead, it gives you atmosphere. The place is difficult to comprehend. Its interior seems overwhelming. Its sacred power is described with such intensity that even the Anuna gods remain outside. That is the line that brought you here. Not a command shouted across heaven, not a battle, not a threat, a refusal to approach, or perhaps a hesitation. The distinction matters. The Sumerian composition commonly known today as Enki, and the world order celebrates Enki's authority, his sanctuary, and his role in arranging the functions of civilization. The poem belongs to the literary tradition preserved by scribes in ancient Mesopotamia. Within that praise, Enki's dwelling appears as a place of tremendous sacred force. The wording is poetic, it is not a legal decree. No surviving line states plainly that the Anuna were formally forbidden from challenging Enki. That modern phrasing goes beyond the tablet. Yet the genuine passage remains remarkable enough without embellishment. The gods do not simply wander inside, they remain at a distance. You hear nothing at first, then a faint sound of water returns beneath the silence. The sanctuary is associated with Enki's watery domain, the deep freshwater source imagined beneath the earth. In the poetry, that hidden abundance and the sacred building seem to belong to one another. The temple is not merely a house, it is a cosmic centre. That idea fits a mainstream historical pattern. Ancient Mesopotamian temples were understood as more than public gathering spaces. They were the earthly residences of gods, places where divine presence could be maintained through offerings, ritual care, music, purification, and carefully regulated access. Excavations across Mesopotamia confirm that temple complexes could contain restricted areas not intended for ordinary movement. Access had meaning, distance had meaning. A closed door could express hierarchy. You imagine approaching as an ordinary inhabitant of Eridu may have done. Perhaps you bring grain, perhaps oil, perhaps a small offering prepared by your household. You may enter part of the complex, but not every room. Priests move where you cannot. Specialists handle objects you do not touch. The innermost sacred space belongs symbolically to the god. The boundary does not insult you. It defines the place. Now enlarge that idea. What if even gods encounter boundaries? That possibility changes the tone of the poem. The Anunna are not mortals. They belong to the divine world. Yet the sanctuary inspires caution even in them. Perhaps this is merely literary praise. If a poet wishes to glorify Enki, what better way than to show other gods overwhelmed by his dwelling? The technique is familiar. A king is called incomparable, a temple is called unsurpassed. A god's radiance fills heaven and earth. Ancient praise is rarely shy. Sumerian poets did not invent modest advertising. Still, exaggeration can reveal values. To describe divine beings as keeping their distance tells you what sacred power looks like in the poet's imagination. It creates hierarchy without explaining it. That is where the scholarly debate remains open. Some readers understand such language primarily as conventional temple praise. Others place greater emphasis on ritual concepts of divine radiance, fear, holiness, and restricted access. Researchers at Oxford and other major centres of Assyriology have spent decades comparing how similar expressions appear across hymns, temple compositions, and myths. No single English word captures every shade of the original. Fear can become awe can become reverence. Reverence can involve danger. Ancient sacred language often allows all of them to exist together. You feel that ambiguity now. The doorway before you is not guarded. No spear blocks your path. No voice orders you away. Yet you hesitate. Why? Perhaps because everything about the place tells you that entry would violate an order you do not fully understand. That feeling may be close to what the ancient poet wanted. There is power in an unspoken boundary. A curious fringe interpretation pushes this scene much further. Some modern writers imagine the sanctuary as a restricted technological complex, perhaps containing devices, records, or machinery available only to a higher class of beings. The idea is dramatic. It is also unsupported by the surviving Sumerian evidence. No tablet describes electrical systems, advanced laboratories, or mechanical security within Enki's shrine. The ancient language is religious. The architecture is sacred. The power is divine. But dismissing the technological theory does not make the passage ordinary. Quite the opposite. You are left with a civilization that believes sacred knowledge can be restricted even among gods. That is stranger in a more subtle way. You begin to notice the language of incomprehensibility. The sanctuary seems difficult to understand completely. Ancient poets sometimes describe holy places through brilliance, terror, abundance, precious materials, divine radiance, and symbolic geography. The goal is not realism, it is transformation. The listener should feel that the sanctuary belongs partly to this world and partly beyond it. You may see walls, but the poem sees cosmic depth. You may see a doorway, the poem sees a boundary between orders of existence. That is why the threshold matters more than the floor plan. Your hand almost reaches toward it. You stop. Remember the pattern you've already uncovered. An represents remote legitimacy. Enlil embodies active decree. Enki holds wisdom, fresh water, craft, and organized knowledge. The Anuna exist inside this layered divine society. Perhaps the sanctuary reveals where Enki's authority becomes most concentrated. Not everywhere. Here, inside his own domain, this suggests something important about Mesopotamian divine power. A god may be supreme within a particular jurisdiction without ruling absolutely over every other deity. Divine power is territorial, functional, relational. Enki does not need to overthrow Enlil. He does not need to replace An. His strength may come from possessing something uniquely his: knowledge, water, ritual wisdom, the ordering of complex systems. That possibility makes the sanctuary feel less like a throne room and more like an archive of cosmic functions. Not literally, but symbolically. You can almost imagine shelves that do not exist, holding invisible principles instead of clay tablets. The image is tempting, and perhaps that is why modern audiences keep turning these texts into stories about secret technology. A hidden repository of knowledge sounds familiar to us. A restricted sanctuary sounds familiar. A powerful group unable to enter sounds familiar. Modern imagination fills the gaps with machines. Ancient imagination filled them with divinity. The difference is enormous. You should preserve it. Still, the ancient world offers its own mystery. What does it mean for knowledge to belong to a god? Can another god take it? Can divine powers be transferred? Can sacred functions move from one city to another? Later, you will discover that the answer may be more complicated than simple ownership. For now, the threshold remains closed. The Anuna stand outside. Perhaps they pray, perhaps they praise, perhaps the poet merely uses their distance to magnify Enki's holiness. Whatever the intention, the image survives. Powerful gods stopped before a boundary. No battle follows, no rebellion erupts, no challenge is issued. That may be the most revealing detail of all. The system holds. You begin to understand that the mystery is not really about a forbidden confrontation. It is about why no confrontation is necessary. Hierarchy has already done the work. Sacred order has already drawn the line. Everyone present seems to know where that line lies, except you. You arrive thousands of years later and ask what they never explain. Why here? Why Enki? Why this sanctuary? What lies behind the boundary? The water beneath the floor continues its quiet movement. The walls remain dark. The Anuna remain outside, and you remain with them, close enough to feel the tension of the place, but not close enough to solve it. Perhaps the doorway was never meant to be opened. Perhaps it was meant to teach you that even among gods, there are places where power stops. The boundary remains where you left it. Nothing dramatic has happened. No god has crossed the threshold. No hidden chamber has opened. No ancient voice has stepped forward to explain why the Anuna remain at a distance from Enki's sanctuary. Instead, you are left with a quieter problem. What exactly are they feeling? Fear seems obvious at first. A powerful sanctuary inspires hesitation, and the language surrounding divine radiance can sound dangerous to modern ears. Yet ancient religious emotion does not fit comfortably into a single English word. Fear can mean terror. It can also mean reverence. It can mean caution before holiness. It can describe the instinct to keep your distance from something not because it is evil, but because it is too powerful to treat casually. You know this feeling in smaller ways. A courtroom feels different from a marketplace. A grave feels different from a doorway. A sacred building can change your posture even if nobody tells you how to behave. The space itself carries expectation. Ancient Mesopotamian temples operated within a world where ritual boundaries mattered deeply. Priests followed procedures of purification, offerings were prepared according to established rules, and access to sacred spaces could depend upon role and status. Researchers at Yale, Oxford, and the University of Chicago have emphasized that Mesopotamian religion was not simply a collection of stories about gods. It was practiced, repeated, maintained. Ritual made divine relationships visible. That is the historical fact you should keep beside you now. When ancient poets describe a sanctuary as terrifying, radiant, or overwhelming, they speak from a culture that already understands sacred space through controlled access and ritual behavior. The language is not floating freely. It grows from practice. You imagine approaching the temple again. This time, you are not searching for hidden machinery. You are listening. A priest's sandals make a faint sound against the floor. Oil lamps produce a soft smell. Somewhere nearby, incense burns with a dry sweetness that settles in your throat. Nobody is rushing. That matters. Ritual tends to slow movement. A hand is washed, a vessel is placed, a doorway is crossed. Words are spoken in a particular sequence. Even the smallest action acquires weight. Perhaps the Anunnaki hesitation belongs to this same world of deliberate distance. The gods may not be afraid in the way a child fears a predator. They may be recognizing rank. They may be acknowledging that Enki's sanctuary is not theirs to enter casually. Or the poet may simply be using Sakri of fear as a form of praise. These possibilities overlap. They do not cancel one another. That is where translation becomes difficult. A single ancient expression can carry shades of awe, dread, magnificence, and divine power that modern languages separate into different words. The original audience may have heard all those shades at once. You receive only the echo. This is one of the open scholarly debates that refuses to disappear. How literally should divine fear be read in temple hymns and praise poetry? Some scholars emphasize literary convention. Others give greater weight to the ritual environment that produced the imagery. A phrase that sounds like terror to you may have sounded like reverence to them. Or perhaps it carried both. Ancient holiness is often uncomfortable. That is easy to forget. Modern religious language can soften sacred power into comfort, peace, and private reflection. Mesopotamian texts frequently allow divinity to remain dangerous. A god can bless. A god can destroy. A sanctuary can protect. A sanctuary can overwhelm. These are not contradictions. They are part of the same sacred logic. You begin to sense why the Anunnaki reaction matters more than their exact emotion. Whatever they feel, they respond. Their behavior changes because they recognize something about the place. That recognition reveals hierarchy. The sanctuary does not need a sign saying entry prohibited. The gods already know. Perhaps that is what reverence is, knowledge of a boundary before anyone explains it. A quirky detail from Mesopotamian ritual culture makes this idea even clearer. Divine statues could be washed, dressed, fed, perfumed, and presented with carefully prepared meals as part of temple service. To a modern observer, the procedure can sound almost domestic, yet the statue is not treated casually. It could become the focus of divine presence through ritual. Ordinary materials entered extraordinary relationships. A garment became sacred because of who wore it. Food became offering because of whom it served. Space became restricted because of who inhabited it. The system depended on distinction. You can imagine a careless visitor wandering into the wrong chamber. Someone would stop him quickly. Not because the room contains a secret engine, because the room belongs to a god. That difference is easy to state and harder to feel, so you remain at the threshold longer. You allow the ancient categories to settle. The walls are not merely walls. The water is not merely water. The doorway is not merely an opening. Everything participates in sacred order. This helps explain why the phrase forbidden to challenge can be misleading. Challenge suggests confrontation. It suggests two sides measuring strength. But what if the ancient text imagines no contest at all? What if the boundary exists before any challenge can form? A junior official does not challenge the king each morning to confirm the hierarchy. A priest does not test the sanctuary by violating it. A god may not need to challenge another god's domain to prove independence. Order works because relationships are already understood. The thought is strangely restful, also slightly unsettling, because systems are strongest when they no longer need to announce themselves. You feel that in the poem. The Anuna do not appear to debate whether they should enter. No council is called at the doorway. No one proposes a daring test of Enki's authority. They simply remain outside. Perhaps that silence is the real evidence of reverence, or perhaps of fear. You cannot separate them cleanly. The poet may not have wanted you to. Across ancient Mesopotamia, divine radiance could inspire both attraction and distance. A god's presence might bring protection, fertility, justice, or abundance, while still overwhelming anyone who approached improperly. This is not unusual in ancient religion. The sacred often contains danger because it exceeds normal human limits. You can find similar patterns across many societies, but here, among the Anuna, the pattern becomes particularly strange. The beings responding to holiness are themselves divine. That intensifies the image. It tells you Enki's sanctuary occupies a special position even inside the world of gods. You think again of An's distant authority, of Enlil's commanding wind, of Enki's hidden waters. Each kind of power feels different. An stands above. Enlil speaks through Deri, where Enki surrounds himself with complexity, wisdom, and controlled depth. Perhaps the Anuna respond to each according to different forms of respect. That would make the divine hierarchy less like a ladder and more like a web. No single line explains everything. Rank intersects with function. Function intersects with the place. Place intersects with ritual. The structure becomes more intricate the longer you look, and that intricacy will matter when knowledge itself begins to move. For now, you remain outside. The oil lamps are lower. The incense has faded. The water beneath the sanctuary continues its patient sounds. You no longer need to decide whether the Anuna feel fear or reverence. Perhaps the ancient world never divided those emotions as sharply as you do. Perhaps awe was exactly the place where they met. The gods hesitate, the boundary holds, and the silence around Enki's sanctuary becomes less like a warning and more like a form of recognition. Something inside deserves distance. Something inside deserves caution. Something inside belongs to a system whose rules are older than any human memory, and you are only beginning to understand what that system protects. The silence around the sanctuary changes once you understand that distance may protect more than holiness. It may protect knowledge. That possibility does not arrive through one dramatic inscription. It grows gradually from Enki's larger role across Mesopotamian literature, where wisdom is rarely passive and sacred knowledge can shape the structure of society itself. You begin to notice the pattern. Enki knows how things work. He knows how rivers should flow, how crafts should be assigned, how rituals should be performed, and how difficult problems might be solved without breaking the larger order. His wisdom is not abstract philosophy. It is practical power that makes him dangerous in a very specific way. A strong god can overpower an enemy. A wise god can alter the conditions that create the conflict. You feel the difference. The water beneath the sanctuary seems to deepen. Somewhere in the imagined chamber, a vessel touches stone with a faint hollow sound. The smell of damp clay returns, mixed now with oil and the dry scent of reed stored against a wall. Knowledge here feels material. It is carried, measured, distributed, preserved. Ancient Mesopotamian texts regularly associate Enki with wisdom, magic, craftsmanship, purification, and the organization of divine and human functions. That is the mainstream historical foundation. Specialists at major institutions such as Oxford, Yale, and the University of Chicago have long treated Enki as one of the central intellectual deities of the Sumerian pantheon. But the word wisdom can sound too gentle. It suggests an elderly figure offering advice beside a quiet fire. Enki is more complicated. He is strategic. He can hide information. He can reveal information. He can find loopholes. He can preserve someone when another divine decision seems final. That pattern appears especially clearly in later Mesopotamian flood traditions, where the god corresponding to Enki helps ensure human survival despite a divine decision toward destruction. The details differ across texts. The larger character remains recognizable. Enki does not always confront authority directly. He works around it. That is a very different kind of challenge. Perhaps you remember Enlil's world of decrees. A decision is spoken, order is established. But what happens when wisdom recognizes consequences the decree is not solved? Now you begin to see the tension. Command and knowledge are not enemies, yet they do not always point in the same direction. A ruler may possess authority, an advisor may possess information. History contains enough examples to make that relationship familiar. Ancient mythology simply gives it divine scale. Enki's peculiar authority may therefore come partly from understanding systems better than anyone else. Water systems, ritual systems, craft systems, social systems, even divine systems. If that sounds almost bureaucratic, it should. Mesopotamian civilization itself depends heavily upon administration. Canals must be maintained. Labour must be recorded. Offerings must be distributed. Fields must be measured. The divine world mirrors this complexity. Someone must understand the structure. That someone is often Enki. One quirky detail appears in stories where he becomes associated with cleverness that borders on mischief. He can drink too much, he can make questionable decisions, he can become involved in exchanges that later need correction. Wisdom, apparently, does not eliminate poor judgment. There is something comforting in that. Even the god of intelligence occasionally creates paperwork for everyone else. Yet these amusing moments reveal something serious. Knowledge in Mesopotamian mythology is mobile. It can be possessed, it can be transferred, it can be lost, it can be recovered. That idea moves you toward the next layer of the mystery. If civilization depends upon certain divine powers or principles, then controlling those powers means controlling civilization itself. This does not mean Enki guards secret technology in a modern sense. There are no ancient instructions for engines, machines, or advanced devices hidden in his temple. The surviving evidence remains religious and symbolic, but symbols can still represent real structures of authority. A priestly ritual is knowledge, a scribal tradition is knowledge. A method of irrigation is knowledge, a calendar is knowledge, a legal formula is knowledge. A city cannot function without people who know how these systems operate. Perhaps the mythology expresses that reality at a cosmic level. The god who knows the structure becomes indispensable. Your mind drifts into a scribal room again. Clay tablets rest along shelves. Some contain lists of professions, others preserve incantations. Others record mathematical exercises, medical recipes, hymns, or legal agreements. Knowledge has compartment. Not everyone learns everything. A scribe studies for years. A ritual specialist memorizes procedures. A craftsman learns techniques through practice. A priest knows which words belong to which ceremony. Access is unequal. That historical reality makes Enki's divine role easier to understand. Knowledge has always created hierarchy. The open scholarly debate concerns how directly mythological descriptions of sacred knowledge reflect actual institutions. Some historians interpret these divine powers mainly as literary expressions of cosmic order. Others emphasize their connection with scribal culture, temple authority, and the social control of specialized expertise. There is evidence for both approaches. The texts come from educated scribes. That fact matters. They lived in a world where knowledge itself separated social roles. A written tablet could carry authority precisely because most people could not read it. You can almost feel that imbalance. A farmer sees marks, a scribe sees language, a ritual expert sees procedure, a scholar today sees a damaged line requiring years of comparison. The same clay means different things depending on who understands it. Knowledge creates invisible doors. Perhaps Enki's sanctuary symbolizes such a door. Again, only perhaps the tablet does not explain itself that neatly. Still, the pattern becomes difficult to ignore. Enki's domain is hidden. His waters lie beneath the visible earth. His wisdom operates beneath obvious power. His decisions often work around straightforward command. His sanctuary overwhelms even other gods. Everything points toward depth. You are not dealing with a deity who simply stands on a mountain and announces victory. You are dealing with one who understands the channels beneath the surface. That image is almost too perfect for Mesopotamia. The land survives because hidden water must be controlled through visible channels. Political life survives because hidden knowledge must be translated into administration. Ritual survives because specialized procedures must be repeated correctly. The visible world depends upon structures ordinary people rarely see. Enki belongs to those structures. Perhaps that is why his authority feels different from An's or Enlil's. An can remain distant. Enlil can command. Enki must understand. The difference matters. You return to the title once more. The being the Anunnaki were forbidden to challenge. By now, the phrase has become almost misleading in its simplicity. The ancient texts do not reveal one forbidden master standing above everyone. Instead, they show a world where certain powers may be difficult to challenge, because those powers are embedded inside the system itself. How do you challenge the one who understands the rules? How do you overthrow the keeper of the channels without flooding the fields? How do you reject the ritual specialist without losing access to the ritual? Authority and expertise become intertwined. That is a quieter kind of control, perhaps even a more durable one. You remain close to the hidden water. The air is cooler against your skin now. The chamber seems deeper than before, though nothing has physically changed. Knowledge does that. The more you learn, the larger the unknown becomes, and now one final idea begins to emerge from the darkness. Enki may not merely possess wisdom, he may possess the principles by which civilization is organized. The ancient texts have a name for these mysterious powers. They are not tools, not laws exactly. Not objects in any ordinary sense. They are something between functions, offices, custom, and cosmic permissions. And once you begin following them, the hidden architecture of Sumerian civilization becomes far stranger. The hidden architecture now takes on a name. Not a simple name. Not a word that slips neatly into English. The Sumerian texts speak of mysterious divine powers commonly described by modern scholars as the principles, offices, functions, or attributes that make civilization possible. They are called the Me. You should resist the urge to reduce them too quickly. They are not commandments. They are not technologies. They are not physical objects in any straightforward sense. Instead, they seem to represent the ordered capacities that allow society and culture to exist. Kingship can be among them. priesthood can be among them. Crafts can be among them. Music, sexuality, conflict, judgment, and social roles can all appear within the same strange catalogue. The range is almost bewildering. It feels less like a single system of laws and more like civilization broken into sacred components. You imagine those components arranged around Enki's domain, not on shelves, not inside boxes, but held somehow within the divine order he oversees. That idea comes from one of the most famous compositions associated with Enki, where these powers can be distributed, transferred, and carried from one place to another. The historical foundation is firm. Sumerian literature preserves lists and narratives in which the Mi represent important elements of civilized life, and scholars from Oxford, Yale, Chicago, and other major centers of ancient Near Eastern studies have examined their meaning for generations. Yet no translation captures them perfectly. That uncertainty matters. A modern reader wants a category. The ancient word refuses to cooperate. Perhaps it refers to divine decrees, perhaps cultural powers, perhaps offices backed by sacred legitimacy. Perhaps all of these together. The scholarly debate remains open because the concept seems deliberately broad. You listen to the room around you. A reed mat shifts beneath someone's feet. A jar stopper comes loose with a dry scrape. The scent of wax smoke hangs above the floor. Outside, a distant voice calls across the courtyard. Nothing seems supernatural. That is precisely the point. The Miki are connected to ordinary human activities: weaving, metalworking, government, music, ritual, desire, justice. Even social disorder may have a place. Civilization is not presented as pure goodness. It includes beauty and danger together. That makes the system more believable. Human society has always contained both. One of the strangest details appears in the composition often called Inanna and Enki. In that story, Inanna travels to Enki's city and acquires many of the Mi from him during a feast. The exchange is unusual. There is drinking, there is generosity, there is later regret. Then there is an effort to recover what has been given away. Even divine civilization apparently can become complicated after too much beer. It is a wonderfully human detail. But underneath the humour lies something serious. The Mi can move. That means civilization itself can move. Yes. A city can gain sacred powers. Another can lose them. Political and religious prestige can be narrated as the transfer of divine authority from one centre to another. This is not just mythology. It may reflect the real competition among Mesopotamian cities for cultural importance. Uruk, Eridu, Nippur, and other centres all develop traditions that place their gods within larger theological relationships. Stories could explain why one city possessed certain institutions or prestige. Myth becomes memory shaped into order. You begin to understand why the Mi matters to the mystery. If Enki is associated with these powers, then his knowledge is not merely personal wisdom. It concerns the framework of civilization itself. That is much larger. A craftsman knows a craft, a ruler knows administration, a priest knows ritual. Enki, in the poetic imagination, stands near the level where such capacities are assigned their sacred place. He is not simply one expert among many. He is linked to the system that makes expertise meaningful. This may help explain the reverence surrounding his sanctuary. Again, the connection is interpretive. No tablet says the Anunna remain outside because Enki stores the Mi inside a secret chamber. That would be too neat, but the larger pattern encourages the question, what if the sanctuary symbolizes concentrated order? What if its overwhelming power comes from being associated with the principles that structure divine and human life? You cannot prove it, but you can see why ancient listeners might have found Enki's domain uniquely important. The system reaches everywhere, Kingship is not only political, it has a sacred dimension. Priesthood is not only employment, it has cosmic legitimacy. Craftsmanship is not merely technique, it belongs to an ordered world. Even lamentation, warfare, deception, or social disruption can appear within divine classification. That is one of the most peculiar aspects of the me. The gods do not create a sanitized civilization, they create a complete one. Beauty stands beside conflict. Truth may stand beside falsehood. Celebration stands beside mourning. Human life enters the sacred system with all its contradictions intact. For a moment, the idea feels oddly modern. Perhaps civilization has never been a simple march toward goodness. Perhaps it is an arrangement of capacities. Some build, some destroy, some unite, some divide. The system contains possibilities. Humans decide how they are expressed, or perhaps the gods decide. The texts leave that tension unresolved. Scholars continue debating whether the me should be understood primarily through religion, linguistics, political ideology, or literary symbolism. Some emphasize their connection to divine decrees, others see them as cultural archetypes. Still others focus on how the concept supports the prestige of particular cities and deities. No interpretation explains every appearance. That is useful. Mystery often survives because the evidence itself is complex. You move deeper into the idea. Imagine a world before human civilization. No throne, no loom, no written contract, no temple singer, no organized army, no royal crown. Then imagine these things not being invented gradually, but existing first as divine possibilities. That is the hidden timeline. Civilization exists in principle before humanity fully receives it. The sacred system precedes the human user. That idea changes everything. If the me are older than kings, then kingship is inherited. If ritual offices are older than priests, then priests enter roles already defined. If craft is older than craftsmen, then skill becomes participation in something ancient. Humanity arrives late once again. You have seen this pattern before. Kingship descends, divine hierarchy precedes human rule. Sacred cities belong to a remembered age before ordinary history. Now civilization itself seems to exist in potential before humans organize it. The implications are quietly unsettling. Perhaps the Sumerian worldview does not imagine human beings as inventors at all. Perhaps humans are receivers, users, caretakers, participants in a system that existed before them. That idea will become central when you finally reach the stories of human creation. For now, you remain with the me. You imagine them passing from Enki toward Inanna, then toward Uruk, not as crates, not as tablets, as authority, as permission, as divine recognition that certain powers now belong somewhere else. The movement resembles political transfer. A city rises. A city gains prestige. A god acquires influence. Sacred narrative explains the change. Perhaps that is the real mechanism hidden beneath the story. Yet the religious meaning remains. People believed that civilization possessed divine structure. The two explanations do not have to cancel each other. Myth can be political and sacred at once. You feel that complexity settling around you. Nothing in the ancient world stays inside one category. Temple is economy, king is ritual, water is survival, sasaudu, writing is administration and memory, knowledge is expertise and power. The me contain the same overlap. That may be why they are so difficult to translate. They describe a world before modern categories divided it. You hear water again beneath the sanctuary. The sound seems almost rhythmic now, a slow pulse. The divine powers have names, functions, relationships, and somewhere in the larger system, different gods have different responsibilities. That leads naturally to another question. if civilization has sacred functions, who performs the work? Not metaphorical work, actual labour. Canals must be dug, earth must be moved, fields must be prepared, even in myth. Someone has to do it, and the next surviving tradition gives you an answer stranger than any secret tablet. Before humans labour for the gods themselves labour first. The first sound is not prayer, it is digging. You hear the dull bite of tools entering wet earth, followed by the scrape of mud being lifted and thrown aside. Somewhere in the darkness, before humanity enters the story, divine beings are working, not ruling, not receiving offerings, working. The image is strange enough that you almost miss how important it is. Ancient Mesopotamian creation traditions preserve memories of a time when lesser gods performed exhausting labour before human beings were created to take over part of that burden. The surviving texts differ in language and emphasis. Some are Sumerian, others belong to later Akkadian traditions, yet the recurring pattern is unmistakable. Divine labour comes first, human labour comes later. That sequence is one of the most revealing clues in the entire hidden timeline. You stand beside an unfinished canal. The earth is heavy with water. Mud clings to ankles and tools. The air smells of wet soil, reed roots, and sweat. The workers before you are not ordinary people. They are gods. That fact is not presented as a metaphor in the narrative. They are assigned labour. They dig. They carry. They become exhausted. Eventually they protest. Researchers from institutions such as Yale, Oxford, and the University of Chicago have long examined Mesopotamian creation literature through surviving tablets from several periods. One important Sumerian composition, often called Enki and Ninmah, presents a world in which divine labour becomes a problem requiring a new solution. Later Akkadian traditions develop this theme even more dramatically. The basic historical point is clear. Mesopotamian mythology could have imagined gods divided by work. That detail matters because it confirms something you have already suspected. The divine world has classes. Not every god occupies the same rank. Not every divine being enjoys the same privileges. Some command, some advise, some judge, some perform labour. The heavens are hierarchical before humanity appears. You hear another load of earth fall beside the canal. The sound is heavy. The worker pauses. Perhaps even immortality becomes tiring when someone else designs the irrigation schedule. There is gentle absurdity in the idea, but the mythology does not treat the complaint as meaningless. Labour is serious. Canals are serious for Mesopotamian communities. Digging and maintaining waterways is essential to survival. A canal is not decorative infrastructure. It is food. It is transport. It is political control. It is the difference between a fertile field and dry ground. To imagine gods digging canals is therefore to place them inside the most fundamental work of civilization. The story begins with necessity. That is important. Humanity does not appear because the gods are lonely. Humans are not created simply as companions. They enter because labour must be reorganized. That thought feels colder than many later creation traditions. You are useful before you are beloved. Perhaps that is too simple. The texts are complicated. Still, the theme remains. A burden exists. Something must change, and human beings become part of the solution. Before reaching that moment, stay with the divine workers. Who are they? Later, Akkadian tradition distinguishes between senior gods and a labouring divine group often associated with the Igigi. The relationship between those later categories and earlier Sumerian groups is difficult. Modern popular retellings often merge every divine label together. They should not. The Anunnaki are not automatically identical with every group of labouring gods. Terminology shifts over centuries. The divine population changes depending upon the composition. That is one of the major scholarly debates surrounding these stories. How much continuity exists between Sumerian and later Akkadian divine classifications? Some relationships are clear, others are not. Scholars must compare language, period, location, and genre before deciding whether two divine groups are functionally equivalent. The tablets resist convenient charts. You can understand why. These stories evolved across generations. A god's role in one city might change elsewhere. A divine title might acquire new meaning. A composition copied 5 centuries later might reorganize an older tradition. The mythology lives. It does not remain frozen. Yet beneath those differences survives the labor problem. The gods work, then the gods complain. That complaint is not merely noise, it becomes political. A labouring group confronts the existing order because the burden has become intolerable. Mio, now you see something important. Gods can challenge. There is no universal rule preventing divine resistance. That alone should make you cautious about any claim that the Anunnaki were simply forbidden to challenge one supreme being. Mesopotamian mythology contains protest. It contains disagreement. It contains divine assemblies forced to respond to arrest. Challenge is possible. The question is what happens afterward. Your mind drifts toward the canal bank. The workers gather. Tools fall up. Perhaps torches burn in the distance, and the atmosphere changes from exhaustion to collective anger. In later tradition, the labouring gods surround the dwelling of a senior deity and demand relief. The scene almost resembles a stream. That modern comparison is imperfect, still corrupt. It captures something important. The divine hierarchy has reached a crisis. The system cannot continue unchanged. A council must respond. The gods who control order discover that order itself is unstable. That is a remarkably sophisticated theme. Hierarchy can organize labor. It can also create resentment. Authority can issue commands. It cannot guarantee obedience forever. You remember Enlil. You remember decree. Now imagine a decree meeting exhaustion. That tension sits at the center of the creation story. Enki becomes crucial again because he understands how systems can be redesigned. If labor cannot continue under the existing arrangement, a new category of worker is needed. Humanity approaches, not yet. For a moment, you remain before creation. There is something unsettling about this pause. The world already contains cities of the gods. It contains canals. It contains work assignments. It contains hierarchy. It contains dissatisfaction. Humanity has not invented any of these things. Humans will enter an already organized system. This is the hidden timeline in its clearest form so far. Divine society precedes human society. Divine labor precedes human labor. Divine conflict precedes human conflict. Divine administration precedes human administration. You are not watching civilization begin, you are watching civilization change hands. Perhaps only symbolically, perhaps the myth projects familiar human institutions backward onto the gods. Many scholars would emphasize exactly that. Mesopotamian storytellers may have imagined heaven through the social structures they knew on Earth. Labor obligations, canal work, hierarchy, temple service, and royal authority become cosmic themes because they dominate human life. That interpretation is persuasive, yet it creates an intriguing reversal. If human society shapes the stories about gods, the stories then tell humans that their own social order has divine precedent. The circle closes. Human labor reflects divine labor. Divine labor reflects human labor. Myth justifies reality by placing it before reality. That is elegant and slightly unsettling. One quirky feature of these traditions is how administrative the crisis sounds. Nobody needs to invent existence from nothing. The problem is workload. There are tasks. There are workers. The workers object. Management must respond. Creation begins to resemble institutional restructuring. It is difficult not to smile. Then the deeper meaning returns. For the people hearing these stories, labour was not the theoretical. Workers could be conscripted, communities owed service, canals demanded maintenance, temples required offerings, and palaces required grain. The mythology speaks directly into that world. Why do humans work? Perhaps because the gods once did. Why must offerings be given? Perhaps because human service supports divine order. Why does civilization require endless labour? Perhaps because labour is older than humanity itself. You hear the tools again. Not many now. The workers have stopped. The silence after labour is more powerful than the labour. Something is about to be decided. The senior gods cannot ignore the crisis. Enki will propose a solution. Clay will matter. Birth will matter. Divine substance will matter, and from that strange combination, humanity will enter the story not as ruler, but as replacement. You remain beside the dark canal. The mud is cold around your feet. The divine workers are waiting. Somewhere beyond them, the assembly is gathering. The system is about to create you. And when it does, the reason may not be comforting. The waiting does not last forever. Somewhere beyond the dark canal, the divine assembly reaches a decision. A problem has already been established. The gods are burdened by labour. The channels must be maintained. The earth must be worked. The divine order must continue functioning. And so humanity enters the story, not as an accident, not as a conqueror, as a solution. You feel the meaning of that before you understand the details. The air changes first. The wet smell of canal mud gives way to something more intimate, something closer to a workshop or birthing room. Clay is brought forward. Water is mixed into it. Hands shape what did not exist before. In Sumerian tradition, humanity can be formed through the cooperation of divine powers associated with wisdom, birth, and earth. The exact stories vary. That variation is important. There is no single Mesopotamian creation account that overrides all others. Different compositions emphasize different gods, motives, and methods. Still, one central theme appears repeatedly. Humans are created to perform labour previously carried by divine beings. That is the historical foundation you should keep clearly in view. Texts such as Enki and Ninmah, along with later Akkadian creation traditions, preserve the idea that humanity relieves the gods of difficult work. Researchers at Yale, Oxford, Chicago, and other major institutions have examined these narratives not as literal scientific accounts, but as theological reflections of ancient social order. They ask a difficult question: why does human life involve labour? The myth answers with another story: because the burden existed before you, you did not invent work. You inherited it. That idea feels strangely heavy. It also fits the civilization surrounding the myth. Mesopotamian cities depend upon organized labor at almost every level. Canals must be dredged, fields must be prepared, walls must be repaired, temples must be supplied, grain must be processed. Animals must be managed, clay must be shaped, texts must be copied. The entire urban system rests upon repeated human effort. Perhaps the creation stories take that unavoidable reality and place it inside the structure of the cosmos. You work because the gods needed workers. It is simple, almost brutally simple. Yet the story does not necessarily describe human beings as worthless. That would be too crude. Humans become essential. Without them, the new arrangement fails. They take over tasks that divine beings no longer wish to perform. They maintain temples, they grow food, they prepare offerings, they preserve ritual, they build cities, they become the working layer between the gods and the material world. You begin to see humanity's role more clearly. Not ruler, not slave in the modern legal sense, something closer to servant, caretaker, labourer, and participant. The distinction matters because modern retellings often flatten everything into a single dramatic claim. The Anunnaki created humans as slaves. The tablets are more complicated than that sentence allows. Labour is certainly central. Service is central. But human society also receives kingship, crafts, ritual roles, family life, law, music, agriculture, and social identity. Humans do not simply carry baskets forever, they inherit civilization. That inheritance comes with obligations. The irony is difficult to miss. You receive the world, and you also receive the maintenance schedule. A gentle sarcasm settles over the thought. Civilization has always included both. The strange creation scenes deepen this tension. In one Sumerian tradition, divine figures discuss how humanity should be formed, and Enki's wisdom becomes important to the solution. The process involves clay. The material could hardly be more appropriate. Clay is everywhere in southern Mesopotamia. It builds walls, it seals jars, it becomes tablets, it becomes bricks. Now, in myth, it becomes human substance. You are made from the same material that holds the cities together. Perhaps that is why the image feels so powerful. Human beings are not shaped from rare stone or heavenly metal. They come from earth, worked by hands. The ordinary becomes sacred. That pattern appears often in Mesopotamian religion. Mud becomes temple, grain becomes offering, water becomes purification. Clay becomes writing, and clay becomes you. One fringe interpretation takes this moment much further. Modern ancient astronaut theories often describe Mesopotamian creation stories as records of genetic engineering carried out by advanced extraterrestrial beings. The clay is reimagined as biological material. Divine substance becomes laboratory procedure. The gods become technicians. The idea is inventive. But it is not how professional Assyriologists translate the texts. The surviving language belongs to myth, ritual, birth symbolism, divine substance, and theological anthropology. No tablet provides a laboratory description. No ancient Sumerian text explains DNA manipulation. The scientific vocabulary is modern. Still, you do not need that theory to find the original unsettling. The myth already says humans were designed for a function. That is enough. You sit with that quietly. Purpose can be comforting. Purpose can also feel restrictive. If you're created to work, can you refuse? If you're created to serve divine order, what happens when that order becomes unjust? If humanity replaces divine labourers who once protested, might humanity eventually protest too? The texts do not answer neatly, but the question hangs there. This is one of the open scholarly debates around Mesopotamian creation theology. How directly do these myths reflect real systems of labour and social hierarchy? Some historians emphasize that the stories legitimize temple service and agricultural obligation by giving them divine precedent. Others see broader reflections on mortality, dependence, and the relationship between humans and gods. Perhaps both are true. Myth can explain society and question it at the same time. The divine workers protested. That fact should not be forgotten. The system responded by creating a new workforce. The solution transfers the burden downward. You have seen this pattern elsewhere in history. The upper level relieves itself. The lower level inherits responsibility. The story is ancient. The pattern is not. Yet humans are given something the earlier divine labourers apparently did not possess in the same way. A whole social world, families, cities, institutions, crafts, music, kingship, ritual, memory, writing. The me you encountered earlier begin to matter again. If those divine powers represent the ordered capacities of civilization, then humanity becomes the species that activates them in daily life. The gods may possess civilization in principle. Humans perform it. A loom requires hands, a canal requires workers, a ritual requires priests, a law requires judges, a song requires a voice, and humanity becomes the operating layer of the cosmic system. That interpretation remains speculative, but it fits the pattern. The gods hold authority. Humans carry out functions. Enki stands between those levels as organizer. Perhaps this is why his role feels so important. He does not simply create, he solves. The labor crisis requires more than divine power. It requires redesign. A new category of being must be introduced into an existing order. You begin to understand humanity's creation as administrative innovation. That sounds almost absurd, yet the ancient stories repeatedly place creation beside work assignment. The connection is difficult to avoid. You imagine the first human figure rising from clay, not fully formed in your mind, no face yet, no language, only presence. The divine assembly looks on. What do they see? A servant, a solution, a future civilization, a creature who will eventually build temples large enough to honor the gods who made it. Perhaps all of these. The texts rarely offer one clear emotional answer. That ambiguity matters. Humanity is useful, humanity is fragile, humanity is dependent, humanity is creative. Humanity becomes capable of preserving the gods themselves through writing. There is a strange reversal there. The gods create humans. Humans later preserve the gods. Without scribes, the names disappear. Without tablets, the stories vanish. Without temples, ritual ends. The creators eventually depend upon the created for memory. Perhaps the ancient writers never meant that implication, but you can feel it. The clay remembers because human hands press signs into it. You return to the creation scene. The first worker stands ready. The divine laborers are relieved. The hierarchy has changed. A new layer now exists. Above are the gods, below are humans. Between them move offerings, prayers, decrees, fears, hopes, and obligations. The system becomes complete, or almost complete. Because once humanity enters the world, another question appears. Who decides where everyone belongs? Who assigns destinies? Who determines rank? Who settles disputes among gods and humans? For that, the divine assembly becomes more important than ever, and the Anunna return not as mysterious visitors, not as secret engineers, as participants in the machinery of fate itself. The assembly gathers without haste. You do not hear shouting, you hear order. A chair is placed, a vessel is set down, sandals move softly across the floor. Somewhere beyond the walls, wind travels over the plain and touches the reeds along a canal. Then the voices of the gods begin. This is where the Anunna become more than a mysterious name. Across Mesopotamian literature, they can appear as members of a divine assembly associated with judgment, authority, and the determination of destinies. Not always in exactly the same way, not always in the same number, but often enough that a pattern emerges. The gods do not merely exist beside one another, they deliberate, they witness, they decide. That is the historical fact you should keep close now. Ancient Mesopotamian texts regularly describe major gods participating in councils where destinies are fixed and important decisions are confirmed. Scholars at Oxford, Yale, Chicago, and other leading centers of ancient Near Eastern research have studied these scenes as part of a wider theology of divine government. The universe has procedure. Even fate, apparently, needs administration. You picture the assembly as a human court enlarged beyond human scale. That comparison is imperfect, but useful. Senior gods occupy positions of authority, others stand nearby, Messengers may be present. Decisions carry consequences beyond the chamber. A city can rise, a king can receive legitimacy, a god can be granted responsibility, a human life can be altered by something decided far above ordinary awareness. The thought is quietly unsettling. You've already seen how power descends. Kingship comes from above. Civilization exists first as divine structure. Humanity is created inside an existing system. Now you discover that destiny itself may belong to that same order. The ancient texts use language suggesting that destinies can be fixed, assigned, decreed, or determined. What exactly that means remains difficult. Does destiny describe a future event that cannot be changed? Does it mean an appointed role, a divine decision, a social function? The concept can shift depending upon context. That is one of the open scholarly debates. Researchers disagree over how far Mesopotamian ideas of destiny should be compared with later philosophical notions of fate. The ancient material does not always describe an absolute future written in advance. Sometimes destiny looks more like status, sometimes function, sometimes divine authorization. That ambiguity matters. You should not imagine a single cosmic book where every event has already been written. The tablets are subtler. Destiny can be something spoken into order. That brings you back to Enlil. His decrees matter because speech carries authority. It brings you back to An. His position matters because legitimacy descends. It brings you back to Enki. His wisdom matters because knowledge can shape how decisions are carried out. And now the Anunna stand among these forces. They are not outside the system. They participate in it. In some compositions, they appear as witnesses or judges. In others, they form part of a larger divine collective. Later traditions can connect Anunnaki figures more strongly with the underworld, where judgment takes on a darker meaning. The identity changes, the function shifts, but the association with authority remains. You begin to understand why modern attempts to turn them into a single biological species create so many problems. The ancient category is functional, as political, theological. Its meaning depends upon the story. That does not make the Anunna less interesting. It makes them more ancient. They belong to a world where identity can be defined by office rather than appearance. A judge is known by judgment, a god is known by domain, an assembly is known by decision. One quirky detail from Mesopotamian literature makes these councils feel strangely familiar. Divine meetings sometimes include elaborate speeches, persuasion, complaints, and attempts to influence senior figures. The gods do not simply exchange telepathic certainty. They argue, they explain, they appeal. Cosmic government includes discussion. Someone, somewhere where, probably wishes the meeting could have been shorter. That part requires no translation. Yet the humour conceals something important. If persuasion exists, then decisions are not always automatic. If gods debate, then divine order contains tension. If an assembly determines destiny, then authority can be collective as well as individual. This complicates the title once again. Who exactly could the Anunnaki be forbidden to challenge if they themselves participate in the process of determining order? The answer cannot be simple. Perhaps certain gods stand above them in particular context. Perhaps sacred boundaries override assembly status. Perhaps a deity such as Enki possesses authority within his own domain that even council members respect. Perhaps the phrase forbidden to challenge reflects modern language imposed upon something more nuanced. By now, that last possibility has become difficult to avoid. Still, the ancient pattern is powerful. You stand at the edge of the divine chamber. No one notices you. Or perhaps no one needs to. The gods are discussing matters older than your presence. The air feels still and sits remote in authority. Enlil's influence hangs over the proceedings like wind waiting outside a door. Enki remains watchful. Other divine figures hold places shaped by genealogy, city, function, and tradition. Then a decision is made. You do not know which decision. That does not matter. What matters is the form. Words are spoken. Agreement is reached. The structure responds. Perhaps this is how Mesopotamian people imagined cosmic stability, not as a universe running automatically, as a universe governed. The distinction is profound. A modern scientific worldview describes natural processes through impersonal laws. Ancient Mesopotamian religion often describes order through relationships. Rivers flow because divine order exists. Kings rule because divine favor exists. Cities prosper because sacred balance holds. Disaster can therefore feel personal. If the system fails, someone may have offended someone else. A god may withdraw protection, a decree may change, an omen may reveal that the assembly has turned against a ruler. You can see how politically useful such beliefs could become. A king who succeeds can claim divine approval. A king who falls can be described as having lost it. Theology makes history legible, or at least manageable. Scholars continue debating how sincerely royal ideology reflected broader popular belief. Royal inscriptions are propaganda as well as religion. Temple hymns praise as well as describe. Omen texts interpret as well as observe. Each genre has its own purpose. You must therefore read the divine assembly carefully. It may mirror human courts. It may justify kingship. It may express genuine theological belief. It may do all three or ancient texts rarely choose only one task. The council scene also reveals another hidden pattern. No god stands entirely alone. Authority is relational. Even powerful figures receive recognition through assemblies, genealogies, temples, and shared decisions. Enlil's command matters because others acknowledge it, and supremacy matters because other gods derive legitimacy from him. Enki's wisdom matters because it solves problems within a collective order. The Anunna matter because they form part of that order. Power is therefore not simply strength, it is position. That is a useful distinction. A god can be strong and still lack jurisdiction. A god can be ancient and still remain distant. A god can possess knowledge that others respect without ruling them directly. This may explain the mystery of the sanctuary more convincingly than any story about prohibition. Perhaps the Anunna remain outside because the boundary belongs to Enki's jurisdiction. Entering would violate order. Not because they are weak, because the system has rules. That idea sounds almost disappointingly ordinary. Then you remember who the participants are. Immortal gods respecting invisible jurisdiction around a hidden freshwater sanctuary is not ordinary at all. It is only quieter than modern legend. You remain beside the assembly as the meeting ends. No hammer falls. No official seal closes the discussion. The gods rise, some depart, others remain. The decisions themselves move outward into the world. A city will feel them. A king may proclaim them. A priest may interpret them. A scribe may preserve them. A human worker may never know the divine conversation supposedly behind his life. Still, the hierarchy continues. The system holds. And now you understand the Anunna differently. They are not merely beings inside a story. They are part of a mechanism. Witnesses, judges, participants. A divine collective through which order becomes legitimate. That makes the original mystery more subtle. Perhaps the question is not who they were forbidden to challenge. Perhaps the question is whether any participant in such a system could challenge the boundaries that made the system possible. You remember the sanctuary. You remember the silence outside it. The Anunna gather where destinies are determined. Yet before Enki's threshold, they stop. That contrast now feels sharper. They can help shape order, but perhaps they cannot stand outside it. And somewhere in that distinction, the forgotten rule is beginning to appear. The forgotten rule does not appear as a command. No tablet announces it with the certainty of a law code, and no divine herald steps forward and declares that even the gods must obey. Instead, you see the rule in behavior. A god enters one place, another stops. A decree belongs to one authority. A different power controls another domain. A sacred object can be handled by one person but not another. A doorway divides ordinary space from restricted space. The system reveals itself through limits. You have already seen these limits among humans. Priests enter rooms ordinary worshippers cannot. Kings claim privileges common workers do not possess. Scribes control knowledge unavailable to most of the population. Temple personnel manage offerings according to prescribed roles. Now you begin asking whether the divine world follows the same principle. Perhaps even gods have boundaries they do not cross. That possibility feels less dramatic than open warfare. It is also more revealing. Ancient Mesopotamian religion repeatedly assigned specific responsibilities to individual gods. One deity controls the sun, another the storm, another wisdom, another fertility, another the underworld. These domains are not always exclusive. They overlap, they shift. Yet the basic structure remains. Divine power is divided. That is your mainstream historical foundation. Specialists at Oxford, Yale, Chicago, and other major centers of Assyriology have long studied how Mesopotamian pantheons organized divine functions through titles, genealogies, temples, and literary traditions. The gods are not identical beings with interchangeable authority. They occupy positions. Position creates limits. You can feel that clearly now. Stand inside a human court. A judge possesses authority. A merchant possesses wealth. A soldier possesses force. A priest possesses ritual expertise. None of them can simply replace all the others without changing the system itself. Ancient Mesopotamian theology may imagine something similar. Enlil can issue decrees. Enki can organize divine powers and can grant legitimacy. Inanna can cross boundaries others avoid, but even she encounters consequences. Every god is powerful. No god is everything. That distinction matters. The phrase forbidden to challenge becomes almost too modern when placed beside such a system. Challenge assumes direct competition, but jurisdiction does not always work that way. You do not need to defeat someone who owns a different office. You simply know which authority applies where. The same logic can govern sacred space. A boundary can exist without hostility. A doorway can remain closed without anyone guarding it. This rule is understood. Perhaps that is what the Anunna reveal outside Enki's sanctuary. They do not need to be physically restrained. They recognize the place. The air around you feels cooler as you return to that imagined threshold. The scent of wet clay returns. Water moves somewhere below. You hear a faint tapping sound, perhaps from a ritual vessel or a wooden fitting shifting in the dark. Nothing blocks the entrance, and yet nobody enters. That silence now feels intentional. One quirky feature of ancient Mesopotamian temple life helps you understand the power of invisible boundaries. Even meals prepared for divine statues could follow highly organized schedules and procedures. Food was not simply placed anywhere. Offerings moved through carefully controlled systems involving temple personnel, storage, preparation, presentation, and redistribution. Sacred order could be astonishingly practical. The gods apparently had catering protocols. You can smile at that. Then you remember what such protocols express. Every action has a place, every role has a proper sequence. Disorder threatens meaning. That logic extends beyond kitchens and storehouses. It reaches into cosmology. If a god controls a domain, crossing into that domain may carry consequences. If a divine assembly grants authority, ignoring its decisions may destabilize the order it maintains. If sacred knowledge belongs to a particular deity, seizing it may become more than theft. It may become cosmic disruption. This is where the open, scholarly debate becomes especially interesting. How literally should divine jurisdictions be understood? Are they reflections of competing temple institutions? Do they mirror political boundaries among cities? Are they literary devices used to organize myth, or did ancient worshippers genuinely understand the universe as divided among interacting divine authorities? The evidence suggests several answers at once. Religion and politics rarely stay separate in Mesopotamia. A city's deity supports its identity. A king restores a temple to strengthen legitimacy. A myth explains why one city's god possesses a particular power. Theology can preserve political memory. Politics can reshape theology. The relationship moves both ways. You begin to see why sacred boundaries might become especially important during periods of political change. If one city conquers another, its king may control the territory. But what happens to the conquered city's god? The temple remains, the cult remains, local traditions remain. Divine jurisdiction cannot be erased as easily as a political border. So new rulers often adopt, honor, or reorganize older religious traditions rather than simply destroying them. The gods survive dynasties. That gives divine offices remarkable durability. A king rules for decades. A god can rule for centuries, perhaps longer. This difference creates another layer of authority. Human rulers enter systems older than themselves. They cannot simply invent every sacred relationship from nothing. They inherit, they negotiate, they restore, they claim approval. The same pattern you found in human kingship now appears among divine powers. Order depends upon recognizing what came before. That is why the hidden timeline continues stretching backward. Before humanity, divine labor exists. Before human kingship, divine kingship exists. Before human institutions, the me exist. Before human boundaries. Divine boundaries may already structure the cosmos. Human society becomes a reflection of something remembered as older, perhaps only mythically older, but older within the logic of the story. You remain before the sanctuary. Imagine one of the Anunnaki stepping forward. What would happen? The tablet does not tell you. Perhaps nothing. Perhaps the question itself would make little sense to the ancient audience. A god who understands the hierarchy might no more violate Enki's sacred domain than a priest would casually enter another temple's innermost room. Not because guards are stronger, because the act would be wrong. Order has psychological force. That may be the true meaning of prohibition. The strongest rule is sometimes the one nobody needs to state. You have seen this in human history. Ceremonial rank can stop powerful people from acting freely. Custom can constrain kings. Religious taboo can shape entire communities without physical enforcement. Social order becomes invernal. Perhaps the divine order works the same way. The Anunnaki do not hesitate because Enki threatens them personally. They hesitate because his sanctuary carries a status they recognize. This interpretation remains speculative, but it is closer to the surviving religious world than stories of hidden weapons or advanced security systems. There is another possibility. The sanctuary may simply function as praise poetry. The gods remain outside because the poet wants Enki to appear incomparably magnificent. That explanation should never be ignored. Ancient hymns exaggerate deliberately. Kings are called unrivaled, temples are called perfect, gods are called terrifying. The language magnifies. But even exaggeration must use images the audience understands. The poet chooses hesitation because hesitation means something. The image works because divine beings are expected to recognize sacred hierarchy. That is the deeper clue. You can dismiss the scene as literary praise and still learn from it. The praise reveals the values behind the poetry. Power is not only violence, power is recognized status. Holiness is not only comfort, holiness creates distance. Wisdom is not only knowledge, wisdom can control access. The system becomes clearer. You begin to notice how many boundaries have appeared since the beginning of this journey. Sky above earth, fresh water beneath the soil, temple inside bee, sanctuary inside temple, priest inside sanctuary, God inside domain, assembly inside hierarchy, humanity inside divine order, the layers within layers. Perhaps the ancient universe is not built primarily from the objects, or perhaps it is built from relationships. Who may enter, who may speak, who may decide, who may know, who may serve. That sounds almost administrative again, but administration is simply hierarchy made visible. You look once more at the silent doorway. The Anuna remain where they are. No challenge comes, no confrontation begins. Perhaps nothing has forbidden them, except the structure they themselves help maintain. That possibility is quietly unsettling. A system can become stronger than any individual inside it. Even gods may obey because their identities depend upon the order itself. Enki remains within his domain. Enlil retains command elsewhere. An remains above. The Anuna gather and judge. Humanity works below them. Everyone has a place. For now, because systems are never completely stable. Power shifts. Cities rise. Languages change. New gods gain prominence. Old names acquire new meanings. And when Mesopotamia moves from Sumerian cities into Babylonian and Assyrian empires, the ancient divine order will be rearranged again. The boundary remains, but the names around it begin to change. The names begin to shift before the temples disappear. You feel the change slowly. The old Sumerian cities remain beneath the same sky. But new rulers speak different languages. Dynasties rise, kingdoms expand, scribal traditions continue. Yet the divine order is retold through new political worlds. The gods do not vanish, they change position. This is one of the most important transitions in Mesopotamian religious history. Sumerian compositions continue to be copied long after Sumerian stops functioning as an ordinary spoken language. Akkadian becomes dominant in administration and literature, while older Sumerian traditions remain prestigious within scribal education. The result is not replacement, it is layering. You've seen this before. A temple rests upon an older temple. Now a theology rests upon an older theology. The ancient gods receive new names, new emphases, and sometimes new relationships while retaining much of their earlier identity. Enki becomes widely known as Ea in Akkadian tradition. Inanna becomes Ishtar. Utu becomes Shamash. Nana becomes Sin. The divine landscape is translated without being erased. That is the mainstream historical fact you should carry into this section. Scholars at Yale, Oxford, Chicago, and other major centres of ancient Near Eastern studies have shown how Sumerian religious traditions continued shaping Babylonian and Assyrian literature for centuries. The continuity is real, so is the change. You hear it in the language first. A scribe recites an old composition, another copies an Akkadian text beside it. The reed stylus is the same, the clay is the same, the gods are familiar, but the political world surrounding them is different. Babylon rises, later. Assyria rises. Older sacred centres such as Nippur retain prestige, yet new capitals require theological importance of their own. Religion adapts slowly, carefully, sometimes quite strategically. One of the clearest examples is Marduk. Originally the city god of Babylon, he grows in status as Babylon's political power expands. In later tradition, he becomes one of the most important gods in Mesopotamia. His rise is not merely literary. It reflects political history. A successful city wants its god to matter. This should not surprise you. Human rulers prefer a heaven that understands local priorities. The joke is gentle. Here, the mechanism is serious. The famous Babylonian creation epic places Marduk at the center of cosmic victory and divine kingship. Older divine relationships are reorganized around him. Authority is redistributed. The ancient hierarchy bends. It does not completely break and remains important. Enlil remains important. Ea remains wise. But Marduk acquires an increasingly dominant role. You begin to see how flexible the divine system really is. A structure that seemed ancient and fixed can be rewritten. Not arbitrarily, tradition still matters. A new supreme god needs legitimacy from older gods. Stories provide it. Genealogies provide it. Assemblies provide it. The new order is presented as authorized by the old. That pattern should feel familiar by now. Innovation appears as inheritance. Change is described as restoration or fulfillment. Human politics and divine politics mirror each other again. Your mind returns to the Anunna. Their identity also shifts. In later Akkadian texts, the term usually rendered as Anunnaki can refer to important groups of gods, but their location and function are not always consistent. Sometimes they appear in connection with the underworld. Sometimes they participate in divine assemblies. Sometimes another group, the Igigi, becomes more prominent in heavenly contexts. The categories overlap. They also diverge. This is exactly where modern simplification causes trouble. One popular account may tell you that the Anunnaki are 12 beings. Another may give 50. Another may describe them as a single ruling species. The ancient texts do not support one fixed number across all periods. That is not a minor problem. It is evidence that the term changes. Scholars continue debating how these divine collectives developed across Sumerian and Akkadian traditions. The question is difficult because the texts come from different centuries, cities, and literary genres. A myth from one period cannot simply be placed beside a ritual text from another, as if both describe an identical theological system. Context matters, date matters, language matters, political setting matters. The debate remains open in many details, but one point is secure. The Anunnaki were not understood identically everywhere. You let that uncertainty settle. It feels appropriate. The gods themselves are moving. One quirky detail makes the transition even more vivid. Ancient Mesopotamian scribes sometimes copied older Sumerian texts with Akkadian translations or explanations beside them. Imagine reading a language already ancient in your own time. You're preserving words from a civilization that feels old even to you. The scribes of Babylon were, in their own way, historians of Sumer. That changes how you think about the tablets. Not everything copied in Babylon reflects contemporary belief exactly. Some texts preserve heritage, some preserve school tradition, some preserve ritual necessity, some reshape the past for current purposes. A tablet can be ancient memory inside a later culture. You walk through Babylon now. The scale feels different. Walls stretch farther, palaces rise. Temples dominate the skyline. The city belongs to a more imperial world than early Eridu. Trade routes extend widely. Royal inscriptions speak with confidence. The old gods now exist inside a larger political machine. Yet, the basic language of divine authority remains familiar. Kings receive legitimacy. Gods grant victory. Temples anchor cities. Omens reveal divine intention. Ritual maintains order. The structure survives even when the hierarchy changes. This continuity matters for your mystery. If the Anunna alter across time, then any claim about what they were forbidden to do must specify which period and which text. There is no timeless Anunnaki constitution. There is no single tablet revealing one permanent rule for every divine being. across 3,000 years of Mesopotamian religion. That kind of certainty belongs to modern storytelling. The ancient evidence is layered. Still, something intriguing survives through those layers. Divine rank remains important. Sacred knowledge remains important. Assemblies remain important. Restricted spaces remain important. The idea that power belongs to positions within a larger order does not disappear. It changes form. Marduk's rise actually proves the system's flexibility. He does not simply destroy the older hierarchy. He is elevated through it. Older gods recognize him. Authority is granted. His supremacy becomes legitimate because the system accepts the transition. That is a subtle point. Even divine revolution requires procedure. Perhaps the most powerful god is not the one who rejects the system. Perhaps it is the one who becomes the system's new center. You pause inside an imagined Babylonian courtyard. The stone under your feet is warmer than the air. Incense smoke drifts from a doorway. A priest walks past carrying a vessel. The names spoken here differ slightly from those you heard in Sumer, but the cadence is familiar. Anu, Enlil, Ea. Marduk, Ishtar, Shamash. The old world has not disappeared. It has been translated, and with translation comes reinterpretation. This is why later underworld traditions become important for the Anunnaki, and some texts place them among judges below the earth. That can tempt modern readers into imagining a secret subterranean race, but the context is theological. The underworld itself possesses hierarchy. Judgment continues after death. Divine administration reaches downward. The same pattern simply changes location. Above, below, temple, assembly, underworld. Everywhere. Order persists. The gods remain inside roles, and humanity remains beneath their decisions. You begin to recognize how dangerous it is to take one late Babylonian description and project it backward onto early Sumer. The centuries between them matter. Imagine someone 2,000 years from now combining every modern religious tradition, legal document, political speech, and folk story into one system. The result would be impressive. It would also be wrong. Mesopotamian religion deserves the same caution. You return to Enki or Ea now. His wisdom survives the transition remarkably well. He remains associated with intelligence, magic, fresh water, and clever solutions. That continuity strengthens the impression that his role belongs deeply within Mesopotamian thought. Yet even he changes in relationship to new divine powers. In Babylonian theology, Ea can become father and supporter of Marduk. Wisdom legitimizes the new king of the gods. The pattern is elegant. Knowledge supports authority. Authority reorganizes order. Order preserves continuity. You have seen these pieces separately. Now they move together. The Anunna also move within them. Their ancient identity becomes more complex, not less. That complexity is exactly what modern legend tends to erase, but you are not going to erase it. You let the centuries remain visible, Sumerian beneath Akkadian, Eridu beneath Babylon, Enki beneath Ea. Old divine assemblies beneath newer imperial theology. The hidden timeline is not one forgotten civilization. It is a chain of reinterpretations. Memory changes, while pretending to remain ancient. Perhaps that is the real secret of the tablets. They do not preserve one frozen truth. They preserve generations arguing with the past. And now, with the old divine system transformed by Babylon and Assyria, you are ready to examine the most modern layer of all. The layer added not by ancient scribes, Wardine, but by us. The newest layer is the easiest to recognize because it speaks in a language already familiar to you. So you have spaceships, genetic laboratories, mining operations, hidden planets, visitors from beyond Earth. These ideas appear often in modern stories about the Anunnaki, especially in books, documentaries, websites, and videos produced during the 20th and the 21st centuries. They are not ancient ideas. That distinction is essential. You've spent a long time inside the older world now, moving through Sumerian cities, temple courtyards, divine assemblies, and the hidden waters associated with Enki. You've watched the meanings of gods change across centuries. Now you watch another transformation. This time, the transformation happens in modern imagination. The clay tablets remain the same, the interpretation changes, you can almost picture the moment. A modern reader opens a translation of an ancient Mesopotamian text and encounters unfamiliar names, impossible reign lengths, divine councils, creation from clay, and mysterious powers connected with civilization. The material already sounds strange. Then another idea enters. Perhaps these gods were not gods, perhaps they were visitors. Perhaps ancient people misunderstood advanced technology and described it using religious language. It is an appealing theory because it converts mystery into mechanism. The temple becomes a control center. The divine vehicle becomes a spacecraft. The sacred power becomes technology. The gods become engineers. The stories begin to sound modern. That is precisely the problem. The ancient evidence does not naturally lead there. Mainstream Assyriology treats the Anunna and later Anunnaki as divine groups within Mesopotamian religion, not as extraterrestrial biological beings. Researchers at institutions such as Oxford, Yale, the University of Chicago, and the University of Pennsylvania study these texts through Sumerian and Akkadian grammar, manuscript comparison, archaeology, ritual context, and the long history of Mesopotamian religion. Their translations do not produce a hidden space program, they produce gods. That is your firm historical foundation. The difference does not depend upon scholars being unimaginative, it depends upon language. A Sumerian word meaning heaven does not automatically mean outer space in the technological sense. A divine journey through the sky is not automatically an orbital flight. Creation from clay is not automatically genetic engineering. A divine assembly is not automatically a command staff from another planet. Context matters. You've learnt that lesson repeatedly. A word lives inside other words. A story lives inside other stories. A god lives inside a cult, a city, a temple, and a tradition. Remove those connections and almost any interpretation becomes possible. That is where modern legend begins to grow. One influential strand of 20th century popular writing claimed that the Anunnaki came from a planet often identified as Nibiru and arrived on Earth in search of gold. According to the theory, these beings created humans through advanced biological manipulation so that humanity could work for them. The story is memorable. It combines archaeology, astronomy, mythology, and conspiracy into a single narrative. It also lacks support from professional translations of the Mesopotamian texts. Nibiru itself appears in ancient astronomy and religion, but not as the inhabited home planet of extraterrestrial Anunnaki travelling to Earth for mining operations. The ancient evidence says something else. Sometimes much stranger things. It speaks of divine order, sacred cities, cosmic waters, kingship descending from heaven, gods labouring, humans being created to assume work, divine powers being distributed across civilization. You can see how pieces of the modern story were assembled. The raw materials are genuinely ancient. The connections are modern. That is an important distinction. A fringe theory rarely invents everything from nothing. It selects, it rearranges, it translates a metaphor into machinery, it treats ambiguity as confirmation, and gradually, a new story begins to look old. Your mind drifts back to the schoolroom in Nippur. A student presses signs into clay. He does not know the word extraterrestrial. He does not imagine DNA. He does not think of planetary mining. His world contains different assumptions. The sky is divine space. Water beneath the earth belongs to sacred cosmology. Kingship has supernatural legitimacy. Temples are homes of gods. Civilization itself possesses divine foundations. If you want to understand his tablet, you must first enter his categories. That is difficult. Modern categories are comfortable. Ancient ones are not. One quirky feature of modern Anunnaki culture is how confidently very different texts are often blended together. A Sumerian hymn may be placed beside a Babylonian creation epic, then beside a later astronomical text, as though all three were written by one author describing one event. You already know why that fails. Centuries separate many of these compositions. Languages change, cities change, gods change, our political worlds change. You would never combine every European text from the Roman Empire through the Renaissance and call them one eyewitness account, yet something similar happens regularly with Mesopotamian material. Ancient time becomes flattened, once flattened. Contradictions disappear because context disappears with them. That makes the modern story smoother. History becomes rougher. Scholars prefer the roughness. The open debate is not whether professional researchers secretly agree that the Anunnaki were extraterrestrials. They do not. The real debates concern much subtler questions. How should the Anunnaki be distinguished from later Anunnaki traditions? How did their roles change? What did particular divine titles mean in specific periods? How literally should divine genealogies be read? How much does mythology reflect political structures? How should difficult Sumerian terms be translated when no English equivalent exists? Those debates are less spectacular. They're also real. Oxford specialists may disagree with scholars elsewhere over a line's grammar or literary context. Researchers may propose different reconstructions for broken passages. That disagreement is not weakness. It is evidence of careful method. Ancient texts are difficult. Certainty should be earned. You can hear the tablet almost asking for patience. Its surface is chipped. One sign is incomplete. Another may have several possible readings. A word appears only rarely. A later copy differs slightly. Then someone on the internet announces that the sentence definitely describes a nuclear reactor. The contrast is almost comic. The clay deserves better. Yet you should not dismiss the fascination that produces such theories. People sense something genuine in these texts. Humanity does seem secondary. Divine society does seem older. Knowledge does seem controlled. Sacred power does seem transferable. The gods do sometimes behave like political elites. Those patterns are real within the mythology. Modern legend begins when those mythological patterns are treated as technical reports. That is the boundary. You've crossed enough boundaries already to recognize it. Perhaps the more interesting question is, why extraterrestrial explanations became so attractive? Modern culture trusts technology. Ancient culture trusted sacred order. When modern readers encounter divine power, they often translate it into the form of power they understand best. Machines, science, engineering, advanced civilization. Perhaps ancient astronaut theory tells you as much about the 20th century as Sumerian mythology tells you about Mesopotamia. Each age explains mystery using its own strongest language. That thought softens the argument. You do not need to ridicule modern believers. You only need to separate evidence from imagination. The tablets should be allowed to remain ancient. Their gods should be allowed to inhabit their own cosmos. Their mysteries should not be forced into ours. You return once more to Enki's sanctuary. The Anunnaki remain outside. No spacecraft waits behind the wall. No laboratory glows beneath the floor. There is water. There is sacred authority. There is poetic language describing a place so overwhelming that divine beings hesitate. That is enough, perhaps more than enough, because now the question becomes purer. If you remove the modern legend, what remains? A civilization imagining divine hierarchy before human hierarchy, a universe where knowledge and power are distributed, a humanity created within an older system, a council of gods that determines order, a sanctuary whose boundary even gods respect. Those ideas do not need extraterrestrials to become unsettling. They already are. You let the modern theories drift away. The clay stays, the marks stay. The ancient voices become quieter again, and beneath everything, the older pattern begins to show itself with greater clarity. Creation, labour, hierarchy, restricted knowledge, sacred boundaries, come cycles of order. Oh, you have seen each piece separately. Now they are ready to form a single shape. The pieces now begin to settle into one another, not perfectly, not like a puzzle designed to produce one final image. Ancient history rarely offers that kindness. Instead, you see recurring patterns appearing across different texts, cities, and centuries. They do not prove a hidden civilization beneath Sumer. They do not reveal one secret ruler standing above every god. But together they suggest something deeper. The Sumerians imagined humanity inside a system that was already old before humans entered it. That idea has followed you from the beginning. Before human kingship, there is divine kingship. Before human labour, there is divine labour. Before human cities receive sacred institutions, the principles of civilization already belong to the gods. Before humans serve tablets, gods already possess sanctuaries, boundaries, offices, and relationships. The pattern repeats too often to ignore. You can hear it now beneath the silence, water beneath stone, wind through reeds, clay beneath the stylus. Each sound belongs to something larger. The first pattern is hierarchy. The gods are not equal. An stands high and remote. Enlil carries command. Enki possesses wisdom and hidden depth. Other deities hold their own functions, cities, powers, and ritual relationships. The Anunna gather within that divine order. Sometimes they judge, sometimes they witness, sometimes their identity shifts, but they never appear as a simple crowd without structure. Rank matters. That is a mainstream historical fact supported by the broad architecture of Mesopotamian religion. Scholars at Yale, Oxford, Chicago, Pennsylvania, and other leading research institutions have shown how divine lists, myths, royal inscriptions, and temple traditions repeatedly organize gods through genealogy, function, status, and cult center. The heavens have order, then comes labour. You remember the canal? Divine workers strain under the burden of maintaining the world. They complain. The system responds. Humanity is created. That sequence introduces another pattern. Power tends to move downward and senior gods determine, lesser gods serve. Human beings eventually inherit the work. Kingship also descends. Sacred authority flows from higher levels toward lower ones. You can imagine the ancient cosmos as a series of channels. The comparison feels natural here. Mesopotamian civilization survives through channels. Water moves through canals. Grain moves into storehouses. Offerings move into temples. Orders move through officials. Knowledge moves through scribes, authority moves through divine hierarchy, everything depends upon controlled flow. The system becomes almost hydraulic. Block the channel, and something fails. Perhaps this is only coincidence. Perhaps the people who lived among canals simply imagined order using the structures around them. That would make perfect sense, yet it gives their theology a remarkable consistency. Civilization is not a collection of isolated inventions, it is circulation. You sense another pattern now. Knowledge is restricted. The meat do not belong everywhere at once. Ritual expertise belongs to specialists. Writing belongs largely to trained scribes. Sacred chambers restrict access. Even the gods appear to respect certain domains. The world is structured not only by what exists, but by who may possess it. That is a quieter form of power. A sword can force obedience temporarily. Knowledge can determine what obedience means. You remember Enki. His strength rarely feels like brute domination. It feels like understanding. He knows where the channels run. He knows what can be transferred. He knows how a decree might be fulfilled without following the obvious path. That kind of wisdom is difficult to challenge because it is woven into the system. Perhaps this helps explain the sanctuary again. Not conclusively, never conclusively, but the pattern becomes suggestive. A place connected with the god of hidden knowledge inspires distance among other divine beings. The tablet may simply be praising Enki, yet the imagery fits everything else you have uncovered. Power concentrates, boundaries form, others recognize them, no battle is required. The second major pattern is repetition through cycles. Cities rise, cities fall, kingship moves, flood traditions interrupt the old order, new rulers receive authority, later empires reshape older gods. Marduk rises without completely erasing Enlil. Babylon inherits while claiming renewal. Assyria inherits again. The system changes by presenting change as continuation. That is a very human habit. You can almost hear a court scribe announcing that nothing important has changed while rewriting the entire hierarchy. Some habits survive remarkably well. One quirky feature of Mesopotamian history is how often rulers describe themselves as restorers. A king repairs an ancient temple. He finds an older foundation. He follows a plan supposedly established long before his reign. Even when constructing something impressive, he prefers the language of return. The newest king claims legitimacy from the oldest past. This creates a strange sensation. The future is always looking backward. Progress wears ancient clothing. The same principle may operate in mythology. A new god rises, but receives legitimacy from older gods. A new city becomes important, but claims ancient destiny. A political transformation occurs, but is described as the restoration of proper order. History moves forward, myth moves backward. Between them, legitimacy is created. The scholarly debate here remains active. How much should these recurring structures be understood as sincere theology, political ideology, scribal convention, or reflection of actual social institutions? Different researchers emphasize different layers. A royal inscription cannot be read exactly like a myth. A hymn cannot be read exactly like an administrative tablet. A temple plan cannot settle a theological question. Yet when several kinds of evidence point toward hierarchy, sacred legitimacy, controlled knowledge, and ritual boundaries, a larger worldview begins to emerge. You are reconstructing that worldview carefully, not a secret history, a mental architecture. The Sumerians seem to imagine existence as ordered through assigned roles. The river has a plate, the city has a god, the king has a mandate, the worker has an obligation, the priest has a ritual, the scribe has knowledge, the dead have an underworld, the gods have domains. Nothing important floats freely. Everything belongs somewhere. That may be the hidden system beneath the stories, and humanity's position within it is uncomfortable. You are central enough to matter, but not central enough to command. Humans feed temples, build cities, copy myths, maintain canals, sing hymns, fight wars, raise children, bury the dead. Yet the oldest stories keep reminding you that the structure existed before you. Perhaps that is why these texts still feel unsettling. They deny one of humanity's favourite assumptions, that the world begins when we arrive. The Sumerian imagination suggests otherwise. Long before recorded history, in a time that is no longer remembered, the divine world is already occupied, work is already assigned, authority is already divided, knowledge is already controlled, creation itself feels less like a beginning than an administrative adjustment. Humans enter halfway through the story. That thought returns you to the original threshold. The Anuna stand outside. Perhaps they're afraid, perhaps reverent, perhaps the poet simply wishes to magnify Enki. But after everything you have seen, the image feels less isolated. It belongs to the pattern, hierarchy, boundary, knowledge, order. The gods themselves participate in these structures. They are powerful, but not infinitely free. They are divine, but still positioned. They can protest, they can negotiate, they can rise, they can fall, they can acquire powers. They can lose them, they can be restrained by the order that gives them identity. Perhaps that's the closest you can come to the forbidden challenge. Not a law written on clay, not a secret ruler, a structure so old that challenge would mean challenging the framework of divine existence itself. That interpretation cannot be proven. It should remain what it is, a possibility. The clay offers fragments, not certainty. The old cities offer foundations, not explanations. The gods remain silent, and perhaps that silence is appropriate. You've followed the pattern as far as it can safely carry you. Now only one place remains, the sanctuary, the same threshold where this journey began. You will return there once more, not to force the door open, not to announce a final answer, only to stand in the darkness beside the gods and listen for what the unfinished story still refuses to say. The doorway is still there. After cities, councils and floods, scribal rooms, a divine labour, kingship, and the slow rearrangement of gods across centuries, you return to the place where the journey began. Nothing has changed. That may be the strangest thing about it. The sanctuary remains beyond the threshold, surrounded by the sacred language of Enki's domain. The hidden waters still belong beneath it. The Anuna still remain at a distance. You know much more now, yet the door has not become easier to open. Perhaps understanding was never supposed to open it. Perhaps understanding simply teaches you why ancient people believed some boundaries deserve to remain intact. You stand quietly. The floor beneath you feels cool. A faint scent of oil smoke lingers in the air, mixed with damp clay and water rising from somewhere below. Outside, the night wind moves softly through reeds along the distant canal. The city has become almost silent. There are no machines behind the walls. No extraterrestrial commander waits in darkness. No tablet has revealed a secret prohibition stating that the Anunnaki must never challenge one hidden master. The surviving evidence gives you something subtler. It gives you hierarchy. It gives you reverence. It gives you sacred distance. And most importantly, it gives you uncertainty. That is where responsible history must finally remain. The composition you first encountered belongs to a genuine Sumerian literary tradition in which Enki's sanctuary is praised as an extraordinary divine place. The Anuna appear unable or unwilling to approach casually, overwhelmed by its sacred presence. That much belongs to the ancient text. Everything beyond it requires interpretation. Researchers working with Sumerian literature at Oxford, Yale, Chicago, Pennsylvania, and other institutions have spent generations comparing surviving manuscripts and examining the religious vocabulary surrounding such passages. Their work does not produce one sensational answer. It produces careful possibilities. The wording may emphasize fear, it may emphasize awe, it may express ritual reverence. It may simply be a poetic method of glorifying Enki. Several meanings may coexist. The ancient audience could have understood shades that modern English cannot reproduce precisely. That is an important historical fact. Translation is never merely substitution. A word travels through culture before it reaches you. You have spent this entire journey recovering some of that culture. You saw the canals, you entered the scribal Dul school, you watched kingship descend from heaven in literary memory, you stood beneath Anne's distant sky, you felt Enlil's invisible wind. You followed Enki downward toward the hidden freshwater deep, you watched divine workers set down their tools, you witnessed humanity entering the system, you sat near the assembly as destinies were determined. Every step altered the meaning of the threshold. At first, it felt like a mystery about one forbidden being. Now it looks like a mystery about order itself. Who may enter? Who may command? Who may possess knowledge? Who may determine fate? Who serves whom? These questions shape the entire Mesopotamian divine world. No single god answers all of them. That may be why attempts to identify one supreme hidden ruler remain unsatisfying. Anne possesses ancient authority, Enlil possesses commanding force, Enki possesses extraordinary wisdom. Later, Marduk rises through a different theological arrangement. The Anunna participate within these changing structures, divine power is distributed, and distributed power creates boundaries. Perhaps that is the forgotten system you've been reconstructing. Not a secret government, not a lost technology, a sacred map of limits. A quirky thought drifts through your mind. After all this cosmic hierarchy, the entire mystery may ultimately depend upon something ancient temple officials understood perfectly well. Some doors are simply not yours. Even gods, apparently, may need to respect the guest list. The humour fades into the darkness, because restricted access is never only about doors, it is about identity. A boundary tells you where one role ends and another begins. Ancient Mesopotamian civilization depends upon these distinctions. The farmer does not perform every priestly ritual. The priest does not automatically command an army. The scribe does not become king because he can read. The king does not personally become every god whose favour he claims. Roles create society. Perhaps divine roles create cosmos. The possibility remains speculative. Scholars continue debating how closely mythological hierarchies reflect actual political and temple organisation. Some see strong connections between divine assemblies and human courts. Others caution that mythology cannot be reduced to social imitation. The gods may reflect society while also expressing religious ideas that exceed ordinary politics. You should leave both possibilities open. The tablets demand that kind of patience. There is one more pattern worth noticing. The ancient stories repeatedly place humanity between dependence and significance. You're created because work must be done. That seems so humbling, yet humans eventually become the beings who maintain temples, perform rituals, preserve names, and copy stories without humanity. The divine system loses its earthly witnesses. That changes the relationship. The gods may precede you in myth, but you preserve them in history. Every name you have heard tonight survives because human hands shaped clay, and Enlil, Enki, Inanna, the Anunna. The people who once worshipped them disappeared into time. Their languages became their own, their temples collapsed, yet their divine world remained inside small pieces of earth. Perhaps that is the final strange reversal. The beings imagined as immortal survive because mortals remembered them. You return your attention to the tablet. Its surface is uneven. Some signs remain clear, others disappear into damage. A broken edge interrupts the composition forever. There may once have been another copy containing a clearer phrase. Perhaps it lies beneath an unexcavated mound. Perhaps it was dissolved by rain 3,000 years ago. Perhaps a future excavation will recover something unexpected. Archaeology always leaves that possibility, but possibility is not evidence. You know the difference now. That distinction is the quiet boundary between history and wishful certainty. One accepts what the clay actually says. The other fills every missing line. You do not need to fill them. The gaps have meaning too. They remind you how little survives. Imagine everything lost from Sumerian literature, songs never copied, ritual explanations destroyed, local myths preserved nowhere, temple traditions spoken but never written, arguments between priests forgotten entirely. The surviving tablets are only fragments of a civilization's thought. This creates the final scholarly uncertainty. Perhaps the passage about Enki's sanctuary belonged to a broader theological tradition we no longer possess. Perhaps ancient listeners immediately recognized why the Anuna stopped. Perhaps no explanation was necessary because everyone already knew the convention. Or perhaps the poet wanted the mystery. You cannot ask. 4,000 years stand between the question and the answer. That distance remains. You look toward the doorway again. Nothing moves. The hidden water continues below. You are no longer tempted to force the sanctuary into a modern story. It does not need one. The ancient version is quieter and perhaps more profound. Power does not always announce itself through confrontation. Sometimes power appears when confrontation never happens. The gods stop, the boundary remains. The listener understands that something has been recognized. What exactly you may never know. Perhaps sacred authority, perhaps Enki's wisdom, perhaps the terrifying radiance of the sanctuary, perhaps merely the language of a poet trying to describe holiness beyond ordinary comprehension. Each possibility leaves the door partly closed. That is where it should remain. The stars above ancient Mesopotamia seem clearer now. The canals move beneath them. Mud-brick cities sleep along their banks. Somewhere, a scribe puts down his reed stylus. He has finished copying the final line for the evening. He rubs clay from his fingers. Perhaps he stretches. Perhaps he complains quietly about his teacher. Then he walks home beneath the same sky you imagined at the beginning. He does not know that thousands of years later, someone will ask whether his gods were visitors from another world. He only knows the story, or perhaps he thinks he does. And perhaps, even for him, the oldest parts already feel distant, long before his own lifetime. Names have changed, temples have been rebuilt, stories have been copied, memories have been rearranged. The hidden timeline reaches backward beyond him too. That is important. Even the Sumerians inherited a past. They were not standing at the beginning. Nobody ever is. You remain by the sanctuary for a final moment. The Anuna do not cross. Neither do you. There is no answer waiting behind the door that history can responsibly give you. Only the pattern remains. Creation before humanity. Order before kingship. Labour before human labour, knowledge before human institutions, boundaries even among gods. Perhaps these ideas preserve nothing more than ancient people projecting their society into heaven. Perhaps they preserve profound reflections on why civilization feels larger than any individual life. Perhaps they do both. The water moves softly. The darkness feels less threatening now. The threshold has become familiar. And perhaps that was the purpose of the journey. Not to uncover one forbidden being, but to discover that the oldest mystery was never a person at all. It was the system surrounding everyone. God, king, priest, scribe, worker, human, all standing somewhere within an order believed to be older than memory. And perhaps the story is not yet complete. Word count 1194. The night now grows softer around the ancient city. You no longer need to search the shadows for another tablet or another hidden name. The questions can remain where they are, resting quietly beside the canals and beneath the broken walls of temples. You allow the voices of the gods to fade. N becomes only distant scum. Enlil becomes the breeze passing gently through reeds. Enki becomes the quiet movement of water beneath cool earth. The Anuna become indistinct figures standing respectfully beyond a sacred threshold. Nothing follows them. Nothing needs to. Far from the temple. Families sleep beneath flat roofs while lamps burn low. A pot cools beside a wall. Grain rests inside storage jars. The day's work is finished. Even the scribal room has become quiet. The last tablet lies on a shelf, its marks slowly drying beneath the darkness. Tomorrow, someone may return to it. Tonight, it simply rests. You can do the same. The old questions have waited 4,000 years already. They will not disappear because you stop thinking about them for a little while. Perhaps another fragment remains somewhere beneath the earth. Perhaps another translation will alter a familiar line. Perhaps the meaning of the sanctuary will always remain partly beyond reach. There is peace in that uncertainty. History does not owe you a final answer. Sometimes it offers only traces, a broken wall, a name, a few wedges in clay, a chance where an explanation once might have been. And still, those traces are enough to carry you across thousands of years. The canal water continues beneath the stars. The reeds bend gently. The city disappears into darkness. The doorway remains closed. But it no longer asks you to enter. You can leave it behind now. Slowly, quietly, and perhaps, somewhere beyond memory, the ancient story continues without us. Good night.